of these languages that were there. And ultimately, as a team, we have to come to, a decision whether, what's in here would benefit our people, would alleviate their suffering, would, this is not something of an ask or a demand from the Abiy regime. This are policy recommendations we're giving to the consensus to the State Department to push for the sanctions, to end the telecommunication blackout, so our people can, can connect with their families, with their friends. The release of, political prisoners. There are, tens of thousands of Amharas that have been rounded up and put into concentration camps. There are Fanos, there are politicians, there are journalists who are in jail. And we, we thought that, okay, there's enough here for us to say, yes, this is a policy recommendation that we can support for the, for the State Department to push forward. So if we did not do this, then there would be another set of principles that would have been endorsed by the State Department as a policy, excluding us again. And so we have to look at it in that context as well. So I'll stop there on it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think ቴድ መጨረሻ ላይ የተናገረው አንድ በግልጽ መናገር ያለብን ከዚህ በፊትም በነበሩ ውይይቶች አሁንም በዚህኛው ዙር በነበረው ውይይቶች በተለይ ከአሜሪካ መንግስት አመራሮች በኩል የሚሰጥ መልስ አለ። when it comes to transitional government አብይ መውረድ አለበት አይነት ነገሮች publicly regime change-ን ደግፎ ኮሜንት ማድረግ አይፈልጉም። So this has been one of the challenges ስለዚህ ጉዳይ ስናነሳ በተደጋጋሚ የሚባለው ነገር ኦኬ አብይ መውረድ አለበት ወይም ትራንዚሽናል ገቨርንመንት መመስረት አለበት አይነት ጥያቄዎች ነው። እዚህ አይነት ነገሮችን ፐብሊክሊ ኮሜንት ማድረግ አንችልም የሚል መልስ ይሰጣሉና ፎቶስ ዲፕሎማሲን ለምትረዱ ሰዎች you would expect that. So ተደጋጋሚ ይህን ስለ አብይ ቅድም ከዚህ በፊት የነበረውን ስቴትመንታችንን አንብቡ ስለነበረው ፕሪሳይስሊ ፎቴስ ነው። ይህንን ጉዳይ ሪከርድ የሆነ ስፔስ ላይ መናገር ብዙም ስላልፈለኩ ነበር። ኢነሰንስ የእኛ ዲማንድ ፖስት አብይ ሬጅም ነው መጀመሪያ ያለበት ብለን እናስባለን እና ያንንም አቅርበናል። ነገር ግን እነዚህ ፖሊሲ ሪኮሜንዴሽኖች ፐብሊክሊ በአሜሪካ መንግስት ኢንዶርስ የሚደረጉ ስለሆኑ it was not accepted። ይህንን በግልጽ ማለት ስለምንፈልግ ነው። ከዛ ውጭ ግን ስለ እንትኖቹ ስናነሳ ደስተኛ እንሆንባቸው ነገሮች አሉ ጊቭ ኤንድ ቴክ ስለሆነ። ለምሳሌ አሁን አንዳንዶቹ ከኮራፕሽን ጋር ተያይዞ የሆነ ስፔሲፊክ እነዚህ ክልሎች እንዲጠቀሱልን እንፈልጋለን ብለው በጣም የጠየቁ ኮሚኒቲዎች ነበሩ። and we thought well I mean for us ለአማራ ኮራፕሽን አልፎ ኤግዚስቴንሻል ትሬት ነው ያለን እና አማራ ሪጅን ውስጥ ብሎ መጥቀሱም ራሱ ያለውን it's more of a governance issue ማድረግ ነው ጉዳዩ። So it wouldn't look good። አሁንም እየጨፈጨፈ ያለ መንግስትን ኮራፕሽን አትበል ብሎ መጠየቅ it's a bit of contradictory እና በዛ ምክንያት ሌሎቹ ሲጠይቁ ለእኛ we let them have it in exchange for other things we demanded እና አንዳንድ ክልሎች የተጠቀሱት በዛ አግባብ ነው። ለእነዚህ ኮሚኒቲዎች ኢምፖርታንት ስለነበሩ እና በጣም ኢንሲስት ስላደረጉ ነው። ያ እንዳለ ሆኖ አንዳንዶቹ የማንወዳቸው ወይም በተሻለ ስትሮንገር በሆነ ነገር ስቴት ቢደረጉ ብለን የምንፈልጋቸው እንዳሉ ሆኖ አብዛኞቹ ነገሮች የምንደግፋቸው ነገሮች ናቸው። ለምሳሌ ፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነርስ ስናወራ ፕራይመሪሊ አሁን ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነርስ ኦልሞስት ኦል አማራ ናቸው። እነዚህ ለቀቁ ማለት ስለ ኮንሰንትሬሽን ካምፕ ስላሉት እስር ቤት ስላሉት አማራዎች ነው የምናወራው። So that's an important policy recommendation ለኛ። የሚዲያ ፍሪደም ስናወራ እነዚህ ነገሮች የአሜሪካ መንግስት ኢትዮጵያ መንግስት እንዲተገብራቸው ምን ያክል ጫና ያደርጋል አያደርግም እሱ ሌላ ነገር ሆኖ ሌትስ አስዩም እነዚህ ነገሮች ቢተገበሩ አማራው የሚጠቀምባቸው ነገሮች እናንሳ። ምክንያቱም ለረቢት ሰው በደንብ ያን የተገነዘበው ስላልመሰለኝ ነው። ፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነር ሲባል ማን ነው ፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነር ከተባለ እንደውም ኤክስፕሊሲትሊ ኢቨን through the negotiation process በተደጋጋሚ ይሄ እኮ ጊቨን ናው አማራ ፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነርስ አይባል እንጂ ዊ ነው ፕሪዶሚናንትሊ አማራዎች ናቸው ፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነሮቹ እና ዲስ ኢዝ ዩር ፖይንት ብለው የተከራከሩም ሰዎች ነበሩ እና እውነታውም እንደዛ ነው። ኢን ሴንስ አብዛኞቹ አሁን እስር ቤት እና ኮንሰንትሬሽን ካምፕ ላይ እየማቀቁ ያሉት አማራ ናቸው። የሚዲያ ፍሪ ደግሞ ሚዲያው ቢከፈት አብዛኞቹ አትሮሲቲዎች ወደ ቢን ኤክስፖዝድ። ስለዚህ የሚዲያ ፍሪደሙን ፕረስ ማድረጉ አስፈላጊ ነው። ፍሪደም ኦፍ ስፒች እና አሴምብሊ በተመሳሳይ እነዚህ ነገሮች በሙሉ ኦብቪየስሊ ችግሩን ሊፈቱታል አይደለም፣ ግን በሂደት ቅድም እንዳልኩት ሀገር ቤት ላለው እንቅስቃሴ ያላቸውን ፋይዳ ነው ምን እየመዘን ያለ ነው አት ሞመንት። ከዛ አንጻር ኢምፖርታንት ሮል አለው። ሰዎች እንደፈለጉ ስብሰባዎችን እያደረጉ ውይይቶችን ቢያደረጉ ነው። የዲስትሪቢሽንም በተመሳሳይ ኢኩታብል በሆነ መንገድ ዲስትሪቢዩት መደረጉ important, of course, in there are certain words we were not happy, and that's part of the negotiation. የተወሰኑ ጉዳዮች ደግሞ it's a matter of principle እንደ ሲቪክ ኦርጋናይዜሽን ሁሌም ሰፖርት ማድረግ መቻል ያለብን ጉዳዮች አሉ። እንደ ሲቪክ ኦርጋናይዜሽን እንደ ሲቪክ አድቮኬሲ በፕሪንሲፕል ደረጃ ሰፖርት መደረግ ያለባቸው ነገሮች አሉ እና እነሱ ታሳቢ ባደረገ መንገድ የተወሰኑትን አክሰፕት ያደረግናቸው። ሳንክሽን ደግሞ እንዳልነው this is something we fought for እና in a way ቴክስቱ ሙሉ ለሙሉ የምንፈልገውን አይነት አይደለም ብንል እንኳን አብዛኞቹ ያሉት ነጥቦች those are some things we also say they just didn't go as far as we wanted እንጂ እያንዳንዱ ነጥብ በምናነሳው ሂደት ውስጥ ስንገመግማቸው የከፍተኛ ፋይዳ አላቸው የሚለውን እንዲረሳ ስላልፈለኩ ነው። ሜቢ አይ ገስ ዊ ካን ጎ ቱ letting people ask and reflect. I think አንድ ሰዓት ብለን ነበረ፣ አንድ ሰዓት ኦልሞስት ሊሆን ነው። ግን ሜቢ I don't think it's fair ሰዎችን ሳንሰማ መሄዳችን እና let's ask other people to come on and request or ask questions or reflect.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Hona, for providing clarification. So for those of you in the audience, if you have any questions, now would be an opportunity to request to speak, and we'll let you join the stage. We just ask that you just please be respectful. If possible, please state your name and any organizational affiliations before your question. We're going to try and take a few questions before providing answers. And if possible, also please try to keep your questions very brief, just so that we can give everybody an opportunity to pose their questions. And we want to make this space as efficient as possible, so we'll try and be very brief with our responses as well. So I think there was a speaker who joined the stage, who requested to speak very early on. That was our friend Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman is a journalist at Al Jazeera English. So I'm just going to give Abdurrahman an opportunity to ask his question first, and then we'll go from there. So Abdurrahman, if you can speak, please feel free to unmute your mic and you can ask your questions. Thank you.
Hi guys, thank you so much for this. I am very impressed how organized the Amhara community has been throughout all of this. And my friend Hone, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. I think we've spoken before. Because I follow him on Twitter, I am been recommended this wonderful conversation. I have a few simple questions. The first is, of course, what is happening on the ground? Where are we exactly? I know this is about the conversation that you guys have had with the State Department, but the context of what is happening back home. So that's what I would want to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abdurrahman. I'm going to just provide an opportunity for maybe two other speakers just to ask their questions, and then we can maybe just go all together.
And, Robel Hone, who was that speaker?
That was Abdurrahman Zed.
Was that clear? Were you able to hear me?
Okay. Oh, so was this Abdurrahman?
You could just call me Abdu. ABDU. Abdu.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that that this was you. Okay. All right. Okay. And because you had not introduced yourself, so that's why I was asking. Thank you.
Okay. So I think I'd like to give an opportunity to maybe King, the little King, and then after
Robel,
that,
who's the next speaker?
Sorry, Ted, can you hear me?
Ted, I don't think you're hearing Robert. Are you hearing him? He was...
No, I'm not. Okay, that's why. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, apologies to those in the audience. I think there's been some technical issues with X Spaces lately, so we'll try and resolve that and make sure everyone's on the same page. But I just wanted to give an opportunity for two other speakers to ask their questions, and then we would try and give responses to three at a time. So next, I'm going to go to Little King. After Little King, I'm going to go to Simbita. So Little King, please, you can unmute your mic and go ahead.
Thank you, Rob. ሰላም እንዴት ናችሁ ሁላችሁም? አይ ቲንክ በአማርኛ ብናገር ሞር ሀሳቤ መግለጽ እችላለሁ። ምንድነው የኔ ሀሳብ? በተቻለ መጠን አይ ነው በጣም ቢዚ እንደሆናችሁ ከጊዜ አንፃር ብዙ ነገሮች በትክክል እንትን ላይሉ ይችላሉ፣ ግን ለኦዲየንሱ ዛሬ ከ2 ደቂቃ እስከ 3 ደቂቃ ላይ አንዳንዱ ሰው ብትሰጡና ከዛ በኋላ ኢንፑት እንደ ኢንፑት ብትወስዷቸው ጥያቄዎቹን ምናልባት ዛሬ ካልቻለ ሌላ ቀን ደግሞ የምትመልሱበትን ስፔስ ብታዘጋጁ ጥያቄዎቹን ዛሬ ለመመለስ ምናልባት ብዙ ጊዜ ስለሚጠይቅ ማለት ነው። ከዛ በመቀጠል ቴንኪው ሆነ ነገሮችን በአማርኛ አድሬስ ለማድረግ የሞከርከው ነገር በጣም መልካም ነው። ምክንያቱም አብዛኛው ኦዲየንሳችን እዚህ ጋር አማርኛ ተናጋሪና አማርኛ የሚሰማ ኦዲየንስ ነው እና አንዳንዴ እንደዛ ማየት ነገሮች ቢለመዱ በጣም መልካም ነው ብዬ አስባለሁ። ለሱ በጣም ትልቅ አክብሮት አለኝ። ሌላው ሌሎች ድርጅቶች ነበሩ ወይ የአማራ ድርጅቶች ወይስ ደግሞ አይ ቲንክ በጣም ብዙ ድርጅቶች አሉ። ከነዛ ድርጅቶች መካከል የተሳተፈ አለ ወይ ወይስ ደግሞ ትሪፕል ኤ ብቻውን ነበር ወይ የተሳተፈው በዛ ውይይት ላይ? አንደኛው ጥያቄ ነው። ሁለተኛው ጥያቄ የኛ ጉዳይ ከሌሎቹ ጋር እኩል ነው ወይ የሚታየው? አሚን እሱን ነገር ለብቻ በደንብ ማስያዝ አይቻልም ወይ? ስቴት ዲፓርትመንት የኛን ጉዳይ በጣም አንገብጋቢና እጅግ በጣም ከባድ ስለሆነ እሱን ብቻውን የሚያይበት ሚንስ እንዴት ነው መፍጠር ያልተቻለው? እንደገና እነዚህ 7 ነጥቦች አይ ቲንክ በጣም ኦፍ ኮርስ አይ ኖ የሌሎቹ ፕሬሸር ወደዛ ሊያመጣ እንደሚችል፣ ግን ደግሞ ምናልባት የእናንተን ፑሽ ምናልባት ሞር በምንፈልገው መጠን የሄደ መስሎ አይታየኝም እና እሱም ላይ ከኤቫሉዌሽን አንጻር እንዴት ነው ኢቫሉዌት የምታደርጉት? እነሱ ነገሮችም በደንብ መታየት መቻል ያለባቸው ይመስለኛል። አሚን ብዙ ጊዜ ኢንፑት መውሰዱ መልካም ነው ከኦዲየንሱ ብዬ ነው ማስበው። አሁንም በድጋሚ እነዚህን ነገሮች ነው ማለት የምፈልገው። እስኪ ወደ ቀጣዩ ተናጋሪ ደግሞ ብንሄድ ይመረጣል። ቴንክ ዩ፣ በጣም አመሰግናለሁ።
Thank you, Little King. Next, Simbita.
Okay, you sound much?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. I had one question, maybe another follow-up question after, just as an observer. My question is particularly because of the points you raised regarding negotiations, which I understand definitely, but I think in terms of negotiations, you raised a point about how you were not able to come into consensus on a couple of key points that you raised in the last conference that you held, particularly in terms of the overthrow of Abiy or the removal of Abiy. And you raised the point that you couldn't come to a consensus regarding that, if I'm not mistaken, or other key points within the discussion. But if that's the case, why continue to hold negotiations with these constituents after that? Because to me, it doesn't seem like this is something to, you can just simply brush aside. Like, this seems like a very important sort of key point to just simply ignore. From my understanding, like, this is something that's a deal breaker of sorts. So I'm just sort of confused why to continue to hold negotiations after that. What tangible results do you think you're able to obtain from continuing on to hold negotiations with these parties, particularly from what I understood of the people who you held discussions with in the last conference, where results were directly complicit in parroting a lot of anti-Amhara narratives that caused you to bow out of the last conference, right? So I'm just not sure about how important it is to continue to hold negotiations on such key, significant points, particularly for the freedom of the Amhara people, because I think a lot of people's eyebrows have been raised about that. So that's just my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Simbita. I think at this point, we're going to try and respond to the three speakers who have spoken already. If you've already asked your question, we just ask that you please mute your mic and try to return to the audience just to make room for other people to join the stage. After we finish with the first round of responses, we'll take another few questions. So I'm going to provide an opportunity, maybe if Hona or Ted want to begin with responses.
I don't think Ted is hearing you, so I'll start.
I can't hear Robel, but I can hear the questions and you, Hone.
Okay, let me just quickly answer a few questions and then I'll let you continue. And I just said, ለምሳሌ ታንኪዩ ሁላችሁም ያነሳችኋቸው ጥያቄዎች አንደኛው የሌሎች አማራ ድርጅቶች ነበሩ ወይም በዛ ስብሰባ ላይ ሌሎች አማራ ድርጅቶች አልነበሩ። ትሪፕሌ ብቻ ነበረ ለስብሰባውም ለፎሎ አፕ ሚቲንጉም ኢንቫይት የተደረገው ይሄ ኔጎሽዬሽን የተደረገው ለምን አልተገኙም ምናምን የሚለውን እንግዲህ ያው ድርጅቶች ራሳቸው መልስ ይኖራቸዋል። ግን this has been a pattern by and large እና በአጭሩ ሌሎች ድርጅቶች አልነበሩም። የተወሰኑ ለምንድን ነው ኔጎሽዬት ማድረግ የሚያስፈልገው ከነዚህ ሰዎች ጋር በተለይ ሳንዲያጎ አፕል ካደረገው ሁኔታ አንጻር የሚለው I think that's a very good question። መጀመሪያም ላይ እንዳልኩት እኛ ስለፈለግን አይደለም። in simple terms በግልጽ ለመናገር እኛ ከሌሎች የዲያስፖራ ግሩፖች ጋር የሚደረጉ ኢኒሺዬቲቮች በሙሉ አንፕሮዳክቲቭ ናቸው ብለን ነው የምናስበው። and that's a reflection of the situation on the ground because ብዙዎቹ ዲቪሲቭ የሆነ እና ዲስሚሲቭ የሆነ አፕሮች ስላላቸው ነገር ግን መንግስት የአሜሪካ መንግስት ደግሞ እሱን ሄቪሊ ፕሮሞት ያደርገዋል። as of lately ስትራቴጂካሊ ሚኒንግ ሰጡታል። የራሳቸው ኢንተርፕሬቴሽን ይኖራቸዋል። I don't want to speak on behalf of them ግን ፋክቱ ምንድን ነው? በተቻለ መጠን ሁሉንም ዲያስፖራ ግሩፖች በአንድ ላይ አምጥተው የሆኑ ነገሮች ላይ ተስማምተው እሱን ተስማሙበትን ስቴት ዲፓርትመንት ይዞ እንዲሰራ ለማድረግ የመምረጥ አካሄድ አለ። this is not our preference። የምንፈልገው እኛ ዳይሬክትሊ አግኝቶ ማውራት ማነጋገር አድቮኬት ማድረግ ነው and that's what we continue to do። ነገር ግን እንደ አፕሮች ያንን እየተከተሉ ነው የመጡት እና በዛ ሂደት ያው እስካሁንም ባለፈውም ሳንዲያጎ ላይ አንዳንዶቹ ኢንአፕሮፕሪየት የሆኑ ጄኖሳይዳል የሆኑ ኮሜንቶችን በመስጠታቸው መድረኩን ጥለን የወጣንበት ሁኔታ አለ። in addition to የሰብስታንሻል የሆነ የፖሊሲ ልዩነት በተጨማሪ ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ አሁን ይሄ ሲብስብም ሆነ ከዚህ በፊት የነበሩ ኢኒሺዬቲቮች ፕሮባብሊ ወደፊትም የሚኖሩ ኢኒሺዬቲቮች ትሪፕሌ ስለሚያምንባቸው አይደሉም። ኢትስ ጀስት because we need to represent our community when that platform is created. ከዛ ከፕላትፎርሙ ሙሉ በሙሉ መውጣት ሙሉ በሙሉ እጅ መስጠት ስለሚሆን ማለት ነው። ፕሪፈር የምናደርገው ግን ቀጥታ ዳይሬክት ኢንጌጅመንት ነው። ከዚህ ቀደም ቴድም እንዳለው ቀጥታ ዳይሬክት ኢንጌጅመንት ያደረግንባቸው መልቲፕል ራውንዶች ነበሩ። in this particular setting ግን it was an approach literally sort of pushed by American now.
ያ አቶ ሽመልስን አፎ ለምታ ወስደን ያ አቶ ሽመልስን የተሳሳተ ንግግር ወስደን ወደ
እርስ በርስ ኔጎሽት እንዲያደርጉ ምናምን ልንለው እንችላለን። ግን በአንድም ሆነ በሌላ መንገድ የኛ ምርጫ ስለሆነ አይደለም። ለምን እንቀጥላለን የሚለው አለመቀጠሉ little bit of consequences ስላሉት ነው። አንደኛው ሙሉ በሙሉ ልክ ባለፈው ዊዛውት 13 ነጥቦችን ተስማምተው እንደወጡት እንደዚህ አይነት አማራጭ መምጣቱ ኮንቲኒየስሊ የኛ አጀንዳዎች ኦፍ ተራዳሪ መሆን እድላቸው ከፍተኛ ስለሚሆን it's better to get something and then build on that instead of completely ignoring ብለን ነው የምናስበው። እና ደግሞ እንዳልነው እነዚህ ሪኮሜንዴሽንስ ናቸው። I think negotiation የሚለው ተርሚኖሎጂ it's a little bit tricky ምክንያቱም ሀገር ቤት በጦር የሚዋጉ ኃይሎች የሚያደርጉት ኔጎሽዬሽን ሌቭል ላይ እኩል ስታተስ ስለሚሰጠው that's not what's happening here። ይሄ ስቴት ዲፓርትመንት የአሜሪካ መንግስት የኢትዮጵያን በተመለከተ ምን ያድርግ የሚለው ላይ ምክክርና በዛ ላይ የሚደረግ መደራደር ነው። ኤክስክሉሲቭሊ ስቴት ዲፓርትመንት እነዚህ ነገሮች ብቻ ነው የሚያደርገው ማለት አይደለም። እነዚህ ነገሮች የሚተገብራቸዋል ማለት አይደለም። so the stakes are not as high as ሀገር ቤት ይሄ ሪሊ ባይንዲንግ የሆነ አግሪመንት እንደምትደራደረው አይደለም። so that gives us a bit of leverage tactically extract የምናደርገውን ነገር የምንመዝነው ፋይናሊ ኮንሲኩዌንስ ምንድን ነው። በዚህ ምክንያት ሰንበዲ መጥቶ እንዲገደድ የሚያደርግ ነገር አይደለም። it's not a direct linkage to the situation on the ground ፖዚቲቭም ሆነ ኔጌቲቭ ብዙ ጠመዝማዛ መንገዶችን ነው የሚያልፈው ካለፈ ራሱ ማለት ነው። እና ጊቨን ዳት ሪፐርኬሽኑ ዝቅተኛ ከመሆኑ ጋር ተያይዞ እና ሌላኛው አማራጭ የኛ አጀንዳዎች ኦፍ ተራዳሪ መሆን እድላቸው ስለሆነ ባንፈልገውም በዚህ ሂደት ውስጥ ማለፉ የተሻለ ነው ብለን ወስነናል። የኛን ጉዳይ ከሌሎች ጋር እኩል ለምን ይታያል የሚለው I think that's a question we also ask and this is a question we tell them ለቀጥታ ለህዝብ ምንድን ነው ለሚመለከታቸው ኃላፊዎችም ስናገኝ እና እንጠይቀው ይህንን አማራው ውስጥ አማራው እየደረሰበት ያለው ነገር it's not a good governance issue, it's not a political difference, it's an existential matter and we always say that. so በዛ አግባብ ነው ፕሬዘንት የምናደርገው። ስቴት ዲፓርትመንት ያንን እንዴት ነው ሪሲቭ የሚያደርገው የሚለው we can discuss separately። ነገር ግን እዚህ በኮሚኒቲው ዲፍረንት ኮሚኒቲስ ብለው ሲመጡ ኦብቪየስሊ አንዳንዶቹ ነገሮች ኤክስክሉሲቭሊ በአማራ ክልል ላይ ብቻ የሆኑ ተብለው ሪኮግናይዝ የተደረጉ ለምሳሌ ቴሌኮሙኒኬሽን ብላክአውት ባይባልም የፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነሩ እንደዚህ አይነት ነገሮች ኤክስክሉሲቭሊ ተብለው ሪኮግናይዝ ተደርገዋል። ግን እያንዳንዱ ኮሚኒቲ የራሱ ኢምፖርታንት የሚለውን ነገር እዛ ውስጥ የማስገባት ሙከራ ስለሚያደርግ አልቲሜትሊ that will not be reflected። ግን even beyond that I think ስለ አድቮኬሲ ከዚህ በፊት ስናወራ እንደምንለው we are operating in a hostile environment. that hostility comes from different directions. አድቮኬሲ ታርጌታችንም ላይ at the same time competing groups and at the same time the regime itself. so ከዛ አንጻር የአማራ አድቮኬሲ በጣም በርካታ ፌዞችን ማለፍ የሚጠበቅበት ሂደት ይኖራል። የመጀመሪያው ነገር አሁን ያለ ነው ግራውንድ ሴትአፕ የማድረግ ነው። ከዛ እንደ ቪክቲም ሪኮግናይዝ የመደረግ ከዛ በኋላ እሱን ኮምፐንሴት ለማድረግ ምንድን ነው መሄድ ያለብን የሚለው ነው። አሁን ገና የመጀመሪያዎቹ ስቴጆች ላይ ነው ያለ ነው እና in a way it's a reflection of አጠቃላይ ያለንበት እንቅስቃሴው አዲስ ከመሆኑ ጋር ተያይዞ መሬት ላይ ያሉ ዳይናሚክሶች አሁን እየተቀየሩ ቢሆንም ገና በሚገባው ደረጃ ስላልወጡ የዛ ሪፍሌክሽን ነው ብዬ ነው የማስበው። ግን it's not something we hesitate from pointing out and that is I think from some organizations' point of view, that's where they find a little bit of criticism against Tripoli, not from the Amhara community, from others. We're not concerned about that. ከነሱ ጋር ያለን primarily እኛ ታርጌታችን የአሜሪካ መንግስት ነው እና in everything we do we center what we can get from them, not the rest of the communities, because we know that's just a dead end, it's a fertile, we don't know ምንም እንደማናገኝ እናውቃለን እና በተወሰነ ደረጃ የዩኒክነሱ በዚህኛው እንትንም ሪፍሌክት ተደርጓል፣ ግን በቂ ነው ብለን አናስብም። ይህንን ያው ኢንፑት መሰብሰቡን ምናምን እንግዲህ ኢንፑት የሚሰበሰበው አይ ቲንክ እያንዳንዱን ነገር ያው ኤቭሪዴይ ኦፕሬሽን እየመጣን እዚህ የተናገርን እንትን ማለት ያስቸግራል። ግን በተቻለ መጠን ኮሌክቲቭ የሆኑ ኢምፖርታንት የሆኑ ጉዳዮችን ለምሳሌ አሁን የስቴትመንቶቹን አውጥተን ስፔሶችን ምናምን እናደርገው ኮሚኒቲውን ፊድባክ ለማግኘት ነው እና ዊዱ ጋዘር ኢንፑትስ፣ ግን ኦፕሬሽናል የሆኑ እያንዳንዷን ነገሮች ግን ያው እንደምታስቡት እዚህ መተን ተነጋግረን እንደገና ተመልሰን ልንሄድ አንችልም። ዳስ ኖት ሃው ኦርጋናይዜሽንስ ፋንክሽን ኢንተርናሊ ስሩ አዘር ኮሌክቲቭስ ዊዱ ጋዘር ኢንፑት። አሁን የምንነግራቸውም ነገር ሌሎች በድርጅት ዙሪያ እኛንም ሰፖርት የሚያደርጉ ሰዎች ፕራይቬት የሚያውቁት ነገር ነው። ስ ዊ አር ናው ኤክስፓንዲንግ አውትሪች ቱ ትዊተር ኮሚኒቲ፣ ግን ኢንፑቶችን እንወስዳለን። ዳትስ ሃው ዊ ፋንክሽን። ሌሎቹ አንዳንዶቹ ዝም ብለው የተሳሳቱ ጥያቄዎች አሉ። ለምንድነው ኔጎሽት የምታደርጉት? ማን እንደሰጣችሁ? ማንም እንደዚህ አይነት ስራ ውስጥ እየገባ አይደለም። ዲስ ኢዝ ኖርማል አድቮኬሲ ወርክ፣ ኤቭሪ ኦርጋናይዜሽን ዳዝ ኢት። ነን ኦፍ ዲስ ኦርጋናይዜሽንስ ሌሎቹም ማንዴት ተሰጥቷቸው ምናምን አይደለም። የምንኖረው አሜሪካ ውስጥ ነው። የአሜሪካ መንግስት ኢትዮጵያን በተመለከተ ምን ማድረግ አለበት የሚለውን መናገር ቋሚ ስራችን ነው። ዊዶን ኔድ የተለየ ፐርሚሽን። ግን ዳትስ ኖት አልቲሜትሊ ዊ አር ጀስት ዋን ቮይስ ዊዝን ዘ ኮሚኒቲ እና በተቻለ መጠን ኮሌክቲቭሊ አርቲኩሌት ለማድረግ ኢንፑት ለማድረግ እንወስዳለን። ግን የተለየ ስልጣን ተሰጥቶን ኔጎሽት እያደረግን እንደሆነ ሊታሰብበት አይነት እሱ የተሳሳተ ነው እና ፕሊዝ እንደዚ አይነት ስዕል አትስጡት። እንደዛም አይነት ስራ እየሰራ ያለ ስብስብ የለም። ወና ዶይምታት። ስለዚህ እንደዚህ እንደዚህ አይነት ጥያቄዎችን የምጠይቁ ሰዎች ፕሮሰሱን አልተረዳችሁትም እና ይሄ ማንኛውም ኖርማል አድቮኬሲ ስራ የሚሰራ ኦርጋናይዜሽን የሚያደርገው ስራ ነው። ኦንሊ ዲፍረንስ ምንድን ነው? በዚህ ሂደት ውስጥ ከሌሎች ድርጅቶች ጋር በሪኮሜንዴሽኖቹ ላይ ንግግር ተደረገ እንጂ በየቀኑ የምናደርገው እንደዚህ መደረግ አለበት እያል የምንጠይቀው አካል ነው። አሁንም እንደዚህ የአሜሪካ መንግስት ኢትዮጵያ ላይ ሳንክሽንን ጨምሮ ሌሎች ነገሮችን በማድረግ ኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ላይ ፕሬዠር እንዲያደርግ ነው እያደረግን ያለ ነው። ዳትስ ዋት አድቮኬሲ ኢዝ። ከዛ ከአድቮኬሲ ፐርፐዝ ውጭ የሄደ ሰው የለም ወይም ድርጅት የለም ለማለት ነው። ታንክ ዩ።
just gonna react to what you said and also some of the questions, and I'll try to be very brief and clarify some things. So when AAA does advocacy, especially when we're meeting with members of Congress, in majority of our meetings, we always will have representatives of various Amhara organizations because they are our constituents. And this is the way for us also to train Amhara organizations across the country to do advocacy. So, for example, in 2022, I think, I can't remember the exact number, but we met probably with over 30 members of Congress. And when we do that in 2022, and those meetings were primarily via Zoom meetings, our teams. So, for example, when we're meeting with, congressional representatives in Georgia, we will have leaders, our members of Amhara Association of Georgia present. And the same thing when we are having meetings with representatives from California, whether they are senators or House members. We will have representatives from Amhara Association of Los Angeles or Amhara Association of California present in those meetings. So we've been doing that for several years. I would say, without exaggerating, AAA has probably had hundreds of these meetings over the past, 7 years. And ultimately, it's because we do not, there are 512 members of Congress. Plus, you have the State Department, you have the Treasury, and so AAA cannot scale. to be able to engage all 512 members of Congress, plus state, treasury, and other, U.S. government bodies. So it's critically important that Amhara organizations learn how to do advocacy. So that's why we do that. So, for example, when we had the meeting in San Diego on July 22nd, even though Robel was there for the private meeting, we had members from other Amhara organizations take part in that conversation, in that discussion. So it wasn't just a AAA team. And why do we do this? Because we feel it is important for the Amhara community here in the U.S., especially those that are Amhara organizations, to meet with U.S. U.S. government officials and learn how to advocate for Amharas. And ultimately, we want the organizations at the local level to manage the relationship with their representatives because they are constituents. When I was in D.C. just this last month on September 28th, for some of the meetings, we had constituents from the DMV area to join me in some of those discussions because a constituent presence adds more weight. It is much more powerful. So, though for the specific discussion in terms of like agreeing to these points, it was just primarily AAA. But in majority of our engagement with members of Congress, we always have the leaders of the various Amhara organizations who are constituents present in that discussion, including with State Department officials. I think it was early last year, we met with, early last year and the year before, 2021 and 2022, we met with Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Irvin Masinga. Irv Masinga is now the U.S. Ambassador to Ethiopia. So but at that time, he was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, which is the number 2 in the Bureau of African Affairs. The first meeting was with AAA, but the second meeting, we had all the leaders of FANA present in that meeting because we wanted to make sure that he hears not just from AAA, but also from the leaders of the various Amhara organizations across the country. And we felt that that was critically important. And then also so that these leaders can continue to do advocacy themselves as well. So with the job of advocacy is this is an obligation for all of us to speak on behalf of our people and engage, our representatives, whether it's here in the U.S., in Canada, in Europe, New Zealand, Australia, just across the globe. It's a responsibility and obligation of all Amharas. It's just not ours. So I just wanted to clarify that, and specifically with these points, it was AAA. But when we started in San Diego, there were other Amharas that we took with us to participate in that conversation with the State Department and other diaspora groups. I think Jorge, you responded to Simbeta. I think I was just primarily maybe responding to the Little King. But one thing that's important also to know that to respond to the Little King, his question about is are our issues taken on par with other groups? I would say not necessarily, no, because in the meeting, this last meeting with Hammer and other State Department officials in front of the other various diaspora groups, though the State Department has not condemned these things, Hammer went into some level of detail in terms of what's happening to Amharas, and our push and our ask is publicly condemn them then. So he talked about the rounding up of Amharas across the country. He talked about the obviously the massacre of Amharas, the use of artillery, the situation with the hospitals, and our push has always been publicly condemn these things and hold Abiy accountable. So, and also we do a pretty good job in terms of engaging members of Congress and State Department officials. Before Amharas got engaged in reaching to government officials, I can speak here to the U.S. and at some extent and maybe a little bit in Canada, is that they weren't aware of our community. They had no idea of who Amharas were, especially the State Department did, but they didn't care so much. But especially even members of Congress that were in the Foreign Affairs Committee members, they didn't, because no one was, bringing up Amhara issues. So if you're not bringing your issues to the forefront, why are they going to care? If you don't make Amhara issues a primary issue, a number one issue, then then the U.S. government is not. So there is, there are competing narratives, obviously, right, with the other diaspora communities. One of the challenges that we're facing also is because there are so many diaspora groups here in the U.S. that are advocating the various different diaspora groups, and some of them actually advocate together. One of the things that we observed when we were in D.C. was some of these diaspora groups were advocating together, and some of these diaspora groups do not have a very different narrative about who we are as a people and what they're and the agenda that they're pushing. So the challenge that was presented to us and others in state was, can we just get something that we can push in terms of a policy recommendation? We're getting so many different messaging from all of you. Can we get something that we can push for? And we know it's going to be difficult. Can you come up with something in terms of a policy recommendation that we can push for? And so ultimately we felt at the end, it's better to have some things in there, a policy recommendation that we can push for, that our people can benefit from, than to say completely out of this process and to not have anything that we gain in terms of policy from the U.S. Those sanctions would not be there. As Hone was saying earlier, there is a recognition. Almost all of the journalists that have been imprisoned by Abiy now are Amharas. The political prisoners, almost exclusively, even some of the groups have said they really don't have very many political prisoners. It's mainly Amharas. So they gave in on that. They said it's you guys are going to benefit from this, because majority of the political prisoners are you guys. They're not, they will say we have, a few here and there, but not to the extent as Amharas. So we felt that there would be a benefit ultimately in the end by us, amending to a huge extent the original draft, than for us to stay out of the process and sit there and watch State Department push for policies, recommendations that ultimately would not benefit, Amharas. And so this was part of the calculation that we took, and to working on these principles with these diaspora groups, to ensure that Amhara issues were at least represented, and our people to some extent can benefit from this. Thank you. Honey, Robbie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ted. Sorry, Honey, did you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to tell Ted that Robel is speaking because he's not hearing you.
Okay. I think most of the questions were addressed by Hona and Ted, with the exception of maybe the points raised by the journalist. I don't know if Abdu is still here. He may have dropped down to the audience. But I'm going to try and just briefly address some of Abdu's questions. With that being said, I'll try and be very brief, just because it does kind of, it's a little bit different from what was being discussed as the title of this meeting. So Abdu asked about updates on the ground regarding the conflict, and I think it's important to outline that the fighting has continued between Abiy regime forces and the Fano. This has been reported in various parts of Amhara region. But with this being said, it's been very difficult to obtain information, especially about the humanitarian situation, as a result of telecommunications and internet blackouts. These blackouts have been intentionally used to essentially ensure that the government can kind of exploit the state of emergency to commit crimes with impunity and under the cover of darkness. And so over time, we've seen slowly some of the evidence of these crimes emerge during very sporadic and brief restoration of these services. We had issued actually an update based on a video that was circulating on social media regarding the drone strikes in Fano Salam last month. that was one of the very devastating attacks that actually claimed the lives of many civilians. And unfortunately, Fineto Salam and many of the towns and cities in that area of Amhara region, in the Gojam area, in the Awi area, that's been a site of a lot of the fighting. And unfortunately, there's been a pattern of regime forces facing military defeats by the Fano, and then in retaliation coming after civilian populations. So that included indiscriminate firing against civilian populations' residential areas, house-to-house searches and extrajudicial killings, summary executions, weaponized rape. There's also been the emergence of a humanitarian crisis in northern Amhara, specifically in North Gondar and Wag Himra zones. These were zones that were also impacted by the war in northern Ethiopia, by the invasion by the Tigray People's Liberation Front. And actually, there has been ongoing occupation of Kabyles in areas bordering Tigray. So despite the Pretoria Agreement, the TPLF failed to withdraw from some of those Kabyles. And that's been one of the issues that has caused us to also criticize the Pretoria deal. But regarding the humanitarian disaster, it has been reported by some Amharic outlets. Unfortunately, it hasn't gotten a lot of coverage in English outlets, but we've been trying to provide some translations on our page, so you can go to AAA social media to see some of those articles. I'll try and pin them at the top as well. But essentially, the current humanitarian crisis is very bad as a result of a drought, but also it's a man-made starvation for the reason that the ENDF have been blockading passage of humanitarian assistance, and the government has failed to provide humanitarian aid to these people. And so tens of thousands of cattle have died. They were the main form of sustenance for many of these agricultural communities. And unfortunately now they're exposed to starvation, and they're also exposed to various transmissible diseases such as cholera, which are treatable. But as a result of this blockade, even medication has not been able to reach these populations. So initial reports have said that on the order of dozens of people have been killed. However, the estimates also indicate that on the order of thousands are under critical danger as a result of this drought, and possibly 500,000 are actually under danger in terms of being critically dependent on very swift emergency humanitarian aid. And as we know, for many months now, humanitarian agencies were actually cutting off distribution of aid to Amhara region. It looks like we're seeing some changes with restoration of some aid, but it's unclear what their plan is to deliver such aid to these Amhara areas. With this being said, there was even statements from Fano on the ground, including in the Gondar area, that explicitly called for the delivery of humanitarian aid. And these Fano have actually pledged to facilitate the delivery of this aid and to provide necessary security for the humanitarian workers to do their duties. So I think this is very important, considering the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in North Gondar and Wagamra zones, and the need to facilitate delivery, because this is really man-made famine. But with that being said, there is fighting ongoing in northern Amhara region as well, with fighting throughout central Gondar, South Gondar, and surrounding areas, as well as in the North Shoa, North Wadlow, South Wadlow areas. Unfortunately, there was another airstrike reported in Ankober, which is located in the northern Shoa zone. The extent of casualties is not known. And then in addition to this, there was actually killings of civilians in the Kobo area, which is where civilians were targeted by government forces. And so in a nutshell, this, I think, describes the situation in terms of the conflict. In Addis and in Oromia region, Amharas are facing mass arrests. They're being put into concentration camps. Much of this was revealed several weeks back, and AAA was issued several reports about this, including evidence photographs and videos that emerged that were leaked from various sources. In addition to that, journalists have been rounded up, opposition figures, and various other Amharas from various other walks of life. So it's clear that Abiy is losing control of the country, and the country is really spiraling downward into a very terrible state. So with this, I think I'll conclude my summary or overview. But Abdu, if you're still in the audience, we'd be happy to chat after the space or via email. And I think I'll just lend it back to my colleagues Hona and Ted. Otherwise, we can go to additional questions.
Yeah, I think maybe we should go to receiving some more questions and hopefully wrap up right in, if not earlier.
Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to go to Mizanu first, and then TG, and then Angopa, and then we'll go from there. So Mizanu, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. ለመመለስ ወዲያው ሪስፖንድ አድርጋችሁ በመምጣታችሁ አመሰግናለሁ። ያለኝ ጥያቄ የአድቮኬሲ እና የኔጎሽዬሽን እስከ መድረስ ያለው ላይኑ ምን ድረስ ነው የእናንተ ላይናችሁ? you are doing advocacy ግን negotiation ላይ መድረስ አለመድረስ I know you told us negotiation ላይ ምን ላይ አልገባንም የሚል ነው የተነገራችሁ። How far can you go? This is a matter of like 50 ዓመት ሲጨፈጨፍ የነበረ ህዝብ ወደ 50 ሚሊዮን ህዝብ አሁንም ጦርነት የተከፈተበት ህዝብ ነውና የቱ ላይ ነው ላይኑ አድቮኬሲ እና negotiation ላይ there should be some kind of ብዬ ነው ጥያቄ ነው እንትምለው እስከምን ድረስ ነው የምትሄዱት? ከዛ ውጭ እነዚህ ነገሮች የተነጋገራችሁባቸው ነገሮች ሪኮመንዴሽን ከሆኑ what if you don't agree ምን ባትስማሙ ምንድን ነው የሚፈጠረው የነበረው? እዚህ ደረጃ የተደረሰውና ከዚህ በፊት እኛን ሪፕሬዘንት አናደርግም ብለው ሳይሰሙን ቀርተው ጠመንጃት ሲነሳ ነው አሁን ዞረው እንትን ማለት የደረሱትና I feel like we could make a lot of progress, a lot of pressure ማድረግ ምንችለን። ሌሎችም እንዲያውም የመጡት ሌሎች ፓርቲዎች ፋኖ ባነሳው እንትን ኃይል እና ወደፊት መንግስት ይወድቃል በሚል ነውና this is about us ብዬ ነው የማስበው እና ሌሎቹ ይስማሙበታል በሚለው ነገር እንትን ብላችሁ ትታችሁ መሄድ ይገባችኋል ብዬ ነበር የማስበው የኔ አስተያየት። ከዛ ውጭ ይሄ ሁሉ ነገር እየተፈጠረ ያለው የሁሉ ጦርነት የተፈጠረው ልዩ ኃይልን አስፈቱ፣ ፋኖ ትጥቅ ይፍታ፣ የአማራ ቦታዎች ይመለሱ፣ እንደዚሁም ደግሞ በህወሓት የተፈጠረው ነገር በሙሉ ጀስቲስ ሳይፈጠር ይህን ፕሪቶሪያም ነበለው የናይሮቢ የተደረገውን ስምምነት ይተገበር የሚለው ራሱ as a recommendation እንኳን ቢሆን እንዴት ለመቀበል ቻላችሁ? Because that was the cause of the war first of all. I mean immediate cause ነው ብዬ ነው የማስበው። ግን ያው ይሄን ነገር እዛ ያሉት የተዋደቁ ያሉት ነው ብዬ ነው የማስበው negotiation ላይ የሚደርሱት። እንደ ሪኮመንዴሽን የተቀበላችሁትን እዛ ይቀበላሉ ብለው አያስቡም ወይ ለወደፊት ለሚፈጠር ነገር? አይ ነው negotiation ላይ አይደርሱም። እንዲሁም ደግሞ ዳያሎግ የሚለው ነገር that's too late። ይህን መንግስት ሴቭ ለማድረግ ካልሆነ በስተቀር negotiation ወይም ዳያሎግ የሚለው ላይ I don't think ብዙዎቹ ፋኖቻችን ሲናገሩት ምን ሰማው ነውና that's too late for that። as a recommendation ናችሁ ብላ ብትቀበሉት እንኳን እነዚህ ሰዎች ኦኬ አማራዎች እንደዚህ ይቀበሉታል ብለው ያስባሉ ብለው አይወስዱትም ወይ? እና እነዚህ ሴንሲቲቭ ነገሮች መቀበላችሁ ፋኖቻችን ብዙ የሚናገሩት ነውና ከነሱ ጋር ፓራለል የሚሄድ ነገር መሆን የለበትም ወይ እናንተ የምትስማሙበት ነገር እና that's why እኔ መጀመሪያ ላይ ምን ድረስ ነው አድቮኬሲ እና አግሪመንት የሚለው እንትን ማለት የሚገባው ከዛ ውጭ ሌሎች ጥያቄ ስላመጡ ሌሎች የመጡት ፋኖ ባመጣው ድል እና መንግስት ይወድቃል በሚለው መሰባሰብ ነው እንጂ ኢግኖር አድርገው ነበር ህወሓትና የብልጽግና ጉዳይ ብቻ ተደርጎ ነው ኢግኖር ተደርገን የነበረውና we should have ከዚህ የበለጠ ብዙ አፈር ማድረግ ይገባናል ሊደረግልን ይገባል ጠመንጃችን የተነሳው because ኢንተርናሽናል ኮሚኒቲው አሁንም ቢሆን ድምጻችን ስላልሰጠን ኃይላችን ክንዳችን ነፍጣችን ነው መዳኛችን ብለን የተነሳ ነውና we shouldn't even expect a lot of things from them እና እንደው እንደ ኔጎሽዬሽን ሆነ እንደ ሪኮመንዴሽን ቢባል አትሊስት ፋኖች ሊደራደሩት ይችላሉ የሚለውን ነገር መዝነን ማወቅ አይገባንም ወይ ለማለት ነው I know I'm not organized ለመናገር እንትን ማለት እንፈልገው ሪኮመንዴሽን እንኳን ቢባል እሺ ማለታችሁ ወደፊት ለሚመጡት ነገሮች ሲግናል ይሰጣችኋል ብዬ ነው የማስበው thank you
thank you for the question Mizano next TG TG if you can speak please go ahead
Okay, thank you. ሁላችሁንም አመሰግናለሁኝ my question is ስለ ሆስቶች የዲስከሽኑን ሆስት ያደረገው ግሩፕ Horn of Africa Communities my understanding is like my first question would be is it the same group a while back women of the Horn የሚል discussion my Cameron include ያደረገ discussion host ያደረጉት ግሩፖች ናቸው ወይ እነዛ ግሩፖች at the time የአማራ representative የሌለበት ነገር ግን they were trying to make it appear as if all like Horn ላይ የሚገኙ ኮሚኒቲዎች represented እንደሆኑ አድርገው ባደረጉት like discussionን advertise በሚያደርጉበት ጊዜ because Amhara like ከአምሃራ ኮሚኒቲ ማንም ሪፕሬዘንትድ አልሆነም በሚል ካምፔን ተደርጎ ትዊተር ላይ ዶክተር አበባ at the last minute include እንድትደረግ ሆናለች እና if this is the same group like they have a pro TPLF የሆነ ስታንስ ያላቸው ናቸው like they try to appear as if neutral እንደሆኑ ነገር ግን their agenda is pro TPLF የሆነ የTPLFን ፍላጎት one way or the other promote የሚያደርግ አይዲዮሎጂ ይዘው የሚንቀሳቀሱ ግን ያው just politically correct ለመሆን የሚሞክሩ ግሩፕ እንደሆኑ ነው understand ማደርገው እኔና when we like if these are the same people then እንደዛ እነሱ አይነት ግሩፖች ሆስት በሚያደርጓቸው ዲስከሽኖች ላይ like AAA ያሉ ኦርጋናይዜሽኖች ሲሳተፉ legitimacy አይሰጣቸውም ወይ is my number 2 question legitimacy ምን ከተሰጣቸው እነዚህ ግሩፖች ደግሞ behind the door ለሚያደርጉት discussion without including our representatives ያንን መንገዱን አይከፍትላቸውም ወይ የሚል ጥያቄ ነው ያለኝ thank you
TG next Ankopa
Okay thank you Robel የኔ ጥያቄ በአጋጣሚ እኔ አገር ቤት ስለነበርኩኝ በጁን 27 ስለነበረው ሚቲንግ ያደረከውን ትዊት አሁን ገና ነው ዛሬ ነው የዛ ኮንቲኒሽን ነው ሲባል ይሄ ሪፖርት ያየሁትና እነሱስ ነጥቦች ውስጥ እየሄድኩኝ ነበረ ከትዊቶቹ ለምሳሌ 10ኛው ትዊት ላይ የተገለጸው እናንተ በጣም አጽንኦት ሰጣችሁ ፑሽ ያረጋችሁት የአድሚሽን ኦፍ ፌለር ኦፍ የአግሪመንቱ ፒስ ለማምጣት ፌል ማድረጉን አብይ ደግሞ ከስልጣን መውረድ እንዳለበት እና ትራንዚሽናል ሲቪል ገቨርንመንት መኖር እንዳለበት ብላችሁ ያቀረባችሁትን ስፔሻሊ አብይን መወገድ አሜሪካ የመንግስትን መውደቅ በፍጹም እንደማትደግፍ እንድታምኑ እንደተገፋችሁ ተናግረሃል። ከዛ በኋላ እንደገና ቀጥሎ ያለው ደግሞ በተለይም ጥላችሁ እንድትወጡ ያደረገው ጄኖሳይዳል የሆነ ንግግር ኦሮሞን ወክላለሁ ከሚሉ የዲያስፖራ አባላት ተነግሮ ምንም አይነት ርም ሳይደረግበት እንደታለፈ ተነግሯል። እነዛ ለኔ በጣም ትልቅ ዋርኒንግ ፖይንቶች ናቸው ብዬ ነው ማምነው። ሶ ኢፍ ዚስ ዲስከሽን ኢዝ አ ኮንቲኒዩሽን ኦፍ ዛት ያኛው የሰጣችሁ ሬድ ላይኖች ሬድ አለርቶች በሙሉ እንዳሉ ይታያል። አይ ዶንት ኖ ይሄ ስፔስ ተከፍቶ በደንብ ዲስከስ ተደርጓ ከፐብሊኩ ጋር ምናምን የሚለውን ነገር አላቅም። አይ ዋዝ ኖት ኢን ዘ ስቴትስ በዛ ሰዓት፣ አሁን ነው ማየው። እሱ እንደዛ አይነት ሬድ ፍላጎች በጊዜው እንደዛ ከነበሩ ዋት ዲፍረንት አፕሮች ላይክ ይሄ ነገር ከመጠራቱ በፊት የተለየ አፕሮች ማድረግ አልነበረባችሁም ወይ እነሱ ጋር? አንደኛ። ሁለተኛ አሁን ቀደም ብሎ ሚዛኑም ኦልሞስት ጠይቆታል የኔ ጥያቄ የነበረውን ኢት ሲምስ አሁን ለእኔ የገባኝ እናንተ ኤክስፕሌን ስታደርጉት ስፔሻሊ ቢንግ ኮንቲኒሽን ኦፍ የሳንዲያጎ ኢቨንት እዛ ላይ በጣም ሀርሽ የሆኑና ልትቀበሏቸው የማችሏቸው ነገሮች እናንተ የሰጣችኋቸው የአማራን ይወክላሉ ብትሉ ጥያቄዎችን ኖት ሳይደረጉ ወይም እነሱ በሚፈልጉት መልኩ አስተካክለው እንዳቀረቡት እና ያ ነገር ፑሽ አድርጓችሁ ጥላችሁን በጣችሁ ከተናገራችሁ፣ አሁን ደግሞ ይሄ ዛ ኮንቲኒሽን ከሆነ እና የተቀየረ ነገር ከሌለ ሲመዘን ሁለቱም በሳይድ እና ሳይድ ተደርጎ ሲመዘን አይ ምንም ከማጣት የማንስማማበትንም ነገር እንስማማ የሚለው ነው ሚዛን የሚደፋው ወይስ አሁንም ቢሆን ጥሎ ወጥቶ ምናልባት እነሱ ሞር ኢንፍሉዌንስ ለማድረግ ከፐብሊኩ ጋር ምክክር አድርጎ የተሻለ ጫናና ተሰሚነት ማስጠበቅ የሚቻልበትን መንገድ ቀይሮ መሄድ አይሻልም ወይ? ምክንያቱም the same struggle የተደረገ ዲፍረንት ሪዛልት ኤክስፔክት አይደረግም። so what's changed between the San Diego event and now for you to think that you could attain some things? because ለእኔ እነዚህ 7 ነጥቦች አንዳቸው ከረንት ላይ ያለውን በጣም ኢንቴንሲፋይ የሆነውን የአማራ ሲቹዌሽን ይመልሳሉ ብዬ ስለማላስብ none of them አሜን ጊዜ ቢኖር በእያንዳንዳቸው እንሄድበት ነበር እና what makes you think things improved ወይም ደግሞ ከዚህ ጌን የምናደርገው ነገር ስቴፒንግ ስቶን የሆነንና we'll get somewhere የሚለውን ነገር እንድታስቡ ያደረጋችሁ ምንድን ነው? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gopa. I think now that we've received 3 questions, maybe we can go into responses. So I'm going to give an opportunity for Hona or Ted to go first.
I don't think Ted hears you well, so maybe I'll just start and then Ted can continue. ሚዛኑ ያነሳው የእናንተ አድቮኬሲ ሚናና ኔጎሽት ማድረግ እስከምን ድረስ ነው የሚለው አሁን ግልጽ ለማድረግ ኔጎሽት የተደረገው በዚህ ኮንቴክስት የአሜሪካ ፖሊሲ ኢትዮጵያን በተመለከተ ምን አይነት ይሁን የሚለውን ሪከመንድ ለማድረግ ነው እንጂ ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ምን አይነት ስርዓት ይኖር ወይም ምናምን የሚለውን አይደለም። those are different kind of conversations እና በየቀኑ አድቮኬሲ ማለት በየቀኑ የህዝባችንን ጥያቄ መሰረት አድርገን አሜሪካ እንዲማድረግ አለባት ያን ሞቶት ነው። that's what exactly we did here. የተነሱትን በየጊዜው የምናቀርባቸውን ጥያቄ አድርገን ድጋሜ ሪትሬት አድርገን ኦኬ ከነዚህ ውስጥ ሁሉም ሌሎችን ኮሚኒቲዎችን ቦርድ ሲመጡ የትኞቹ ላይ ተስማማላችሁ የሚለው ነበር ጥያቄው እና አውትፑቱ እንዳልነው necessarily የኛን ዊሽ ሊስት አይደለም ሪፍሌክት የሚያደርገው ኔጎሽየትድ በሆነ መንገድ እነዛ አውትፑቶች መጥተዋል። እሱን ለምን አይሻልም መውጣት አይሻልም ነበር ወይ ምናምን የሚሉ ትክክለኛ ጥያቄዎች አሉ። አይ ቲንክ በተወሰነ ደረጃ የመለስናቸው ይመስለኛል፣ ግን እነሱን ድጋሜ ምላሽ እንሰጥባቸዋለን። ግን ወናት ልክ አሁን ፕሪቶሪያ እንደተደረገው የሆነ ኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ከሌላ አካል ወይም አንድ ታጣቂ ኃይል ለምሳሌ ታንዛኒያ ላይ ኦኤልኤ ከኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ጋር እንዳደረገው አይነት ንግግር አይደለም። ይሄ this is an entirely different nature. አሜሪካ ምን አይነት አቋም ምን አይነት ፖሊሲዎችን ኢምፕሊመንት ታድርግ ኢትዮጵያን በሚመለከት በሚለው ላይ የተሰጠ ምክረ ሀሳብ ነው። ስለዚህ ኔጎሽየት ያደረጋችሁ የሚለው ኔጎሽየት ያደረግነው ሌላ ስቴክ ያላቸው ኢትዮጵያዊነት ብለው አይደንቲፋይ ባያደርጉም ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ያሉ ሌሎች ግሩፖች ስላሉ እና በዛ ዙሪያ አድቮኬሲ የሚሰሩ ሰዎች ስላሉ ኔጎሽየት ያደረግነው የአሜሪካ ፖሊሲ ኢትዮጵያን በተመለከተ ምን አይነት ይሁን የሚለው ሚኒመም አጌን አልቲሜትሊ ፋይናሊ ዩኤስ ፖሊሲ ምን ይሁን የሚለው አይደለም እየተነጋገርን ያለ ነው። ዳት እኛ ማንዴቱ የለንም። ኦብቪየስሊ አርቲኩሌት የሚያደርጉትም ከዲያስፖራው ስለሰሙ ብቻ በቂ አይደለም። ደራራ ነምበር ኦፍ አዘር ፕሮሰስስ ኢንቮልቭድ። ነገር ግን እንደ ዲያስፖራ ኮሚኒቲ ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ያለውን ሁኔታ በተመለከተ የአሜሪካ መንግስት ምን አይነት አቋም ነው የሚለውን የተመካከር ነው። ይሄ ደግሞ የኖርማል አድቮኬሲ ስራ ነው። ኦንሊ ቲንግ ሌሎች አካላቶች ጋር እንድንሰራ መደረጉ በዛ ሂደት ውስጥ ማለፍ አስፈላጊ መሆኑ እና በዛ ሂደት ውስጥ የእኛን ጥያቄዎች አቅርበን እነሱም የራሳቸውን ጥያቄዎች አቅርበው ኔጎሽት መደረጉ ነው። ስለዚህ ሌትስ ኖት ኮንፊውዝ ኢት ዊዝ ይሄ ከተዋጊ ኃይሎች ከመንግስት ጋር የሚያደርጉት ኔጎሽሽን ጋር ወይም ኢትዮጵያን ወደፊት ጣፈንታ የሚወስን አይነት ኔጎሽሽን ጋር አድርገን እናስበው። ኢፍዳት ወዛን እንደዚ አይነት ነገር ቢሆን ትክክል ነው። ምን አይነት ሮል ላይ ያላችሁ የሚለው ጥያቄ ተገቢ ነው። ይሄ ግን እንደ ዲያስፖራ አድቮኬሲ ግሩፕ ያለንበት ሀገር ኢትዮጵያን በተመለከተ የሚኖራትን ፖሊሲ ኢንፍሉዌንስ ለማድረግ የተደረገ ሂደት ነው። that's what advocacy is. We're here to try to influence US policy on Ethiopia. ያንን ነው እያደረግን ያለ ነው እና ለረቤት ኔጎሽታ በቀደምም ብየዋለሁኝ ከሌላ ድርድር ጋር ከዚህ በፊት በቅርብም በመንግስትና በሌሎች ኃይሎች መካከል በተደረጉ ድርድሮች ጋር ኮንፊውዝ አናድርገው። የዚህ ኔቸሩም የተለየ ነው፣ አላማውም የተለየ ነው። ስለዚህ እንደዚህ አይነት ጥያቄዎቹ አይ ቲንክ ከዚህ ኮንፊውዥን የመነጩ ናቸው ብዬ ነው የማስበው። ይሄ በየቀኑ የምናደርገውን ነገር አሁን ከሌሎቹ ጋር ተነጋግራችሁ ኒውስኪት መባሉ ነው እንጂ በየቀኑ ለአሜሪካ መንግስት የምንናገረውን ነገር ነው ሪትሬት ለማድረግ የሞከርነው። በዛ ከሌሎቹ ጋር ተነጋግራችሁ ትንሽ ሚኒመም የምትስማሙበትን ስጡን ሲባል በዛ ሂደት ውስጥ የወጣ አውትፑት ነው። ይሄ ማለት አሜሪካ እነዚህ ነገሮች ኢምፕሊመንት ታደርጋለች ማለት አይደለም፣ ወይም ደግሞ ከዚህም በላይ ከዚህም በታች ኢምፕሊመንት ታደርጋለች ማለት አይደለም። ኢትስ ጀስት ዋን ኢንትሪ ፖይንት ኢንፍሉዌንስ ለማድረግ እንጂ ሴፓሬትሊ በየቀኑ የምንሰራው ስራ አለ። መሬት ላይ ያለው ሲቹዌሽን ደግሞ ባይንድ ላርጅ ዲክቴት የሚያደርገው እሱን ነው። የአሜሪካ ራሷ ናሽናል ኢንተረስት ፍላጎት መሬት ላይ ያለው ሁኔታ ጋር ተዳምሮ ነው አልቲሜትሊ አሜሪካ ምን አይነት ፖሊሲ መያዝ አለባት የሚለውን የሚወስነው። ግን በዚህ ሂደት እንደ ዲያስፖራ ግሩፕ የህዝባችን ድምጽ መሆን እና ሰርተን ፍሬምወርክስ አሉ፣ ሂውማን ራይትስ፣ ዲሞክራሲ የተባሉ እነዚህ ፍሬምወርኮች የሆነ ኢንተረስትን ፑሽ ለማድረግ የሚሰጡት ኦፖርቹኒቲ ስላለ እሱን ተጠቅሞ መሬት ላይ የሚደረገውን እንቅስቃሴ የማገዝ ስራ ነው የምንሰራው። ኢነሰንስ ከዚህ ጋር ተያይዞ መሬት ላይ ከሚፈለጉት ካሉት ሰዎች ጋር እንዴት ይናበባል ይሄ የሚለው አይ ቲንክ ታትስ ቬሪ ጉድ ጥያቄ፣ ጥሩ ጥያቄ ነው። በእኛ አረዳድ መሬት ላይ ያሉ እንቅስቃሴዎች የአማራ ሬዚስተንስ ሙቭመንት የሚፈልጋቸው ነገሮች እዚህ ውስጥ ተካተዋል ብለን አናስብም። ግን ፖለቲካል ፕሪዝነሮች እንዲፈቱ፣ ሚዲያዎች መጥተው እንዲዘግቡ፣ ህዝባችን ላይ እየደረሰ ያለውን ሰቆቃ እንዲያጋልጡ፣ እርዳታ እንዲደርስ ማድረግ፣ ሳንክሽን አብይ ሪጅም አመራሮች ሳንክሽን እንዲደረጉ ማድረግ those are things people on the ground would also demand። ሌሎች ነገሮች አሉ ኦብቪየስሊ ኢንክሉዲንግ አብይ መስጠቁ። ግን እዚህ ጋር የተካተቱ ነገሮች መሬት ላይ ያሉ ኃይሎች እንደ ፖዚቲቭ ነገር ይወስዷቸዋል ብለን የምናምናቸው ናቸው። ባለን ሉፕ ኦፍ ኮሚኒኬሽንም እንደዛ አይነት አረዳድና ያለን እና ነገር ግን ጥያቄው አሁን ያሉት ነገሮች አይጠቅሙም ሳይሆን አይ ቲንክ ኢን ሴንስ ቱ ቴክስ መሄድ ባለበት ደረጃ አልሄደም የሚለው አይ ቲንክ ታትስ ሌጂቲሜት ኤንድ ዊ ኖው ኢት ዊል ኖት ጎ ቢካዝ ኢትስ ኤ ኔጎሺዬትድ ፕሮሰስ። ግን እዛ ውስጥ ያሉት አብዛኞቹ ነገሮች ኢንፋክት ኦልሞስት ኦል ኤክሰፕት ፊው የተወሰነ በቀጥታ በየሚዲያው ሀገር ቤት ያሉ ህዝባችንን ነጻነት ለማረጋገጥ እንቅስቃሴ የሚያደርጉ ኃይሎች የሚሏቸው ጥያቄዎች እንደሆኑ መረሳት የለበትም። ሪጀክት ማድረግ አይሻልም ወይ የሚለው አይ ቲንክ ተገቢ ጥያቄ ነው። And this is where we call it like it's a tough call ያልን ስናስረዳ የነበረው ለዛ ነው። አውት ትሬድ ኦፍ አለው ጥቅሙና ጉዳቱን እናመዛዘን ብለን በእኛ ስሌት ጥቅሙ ምንድን ነው ጉዳቱ ምንድን ነው ብለን ስናስረዳ የነበረው ለዛ ነው። ጥቅሙ አሁንም ሪትሬት ለማድረግ እዛ ላይ የተካተቱት ነገሮች አንዳንዶቹ መሬት ላይ ያሉ ሰዎች የሚጠይቋቸው ለህዝባችንም የሚጠቅሙ ናቸው። ይተገበራሉ አይተገበሩም ሌላ ጉዳይ ሆኖ ማለት ነው። አለመት ሪጀክት ማድረጉ ደግሞ ከዚህ በፊት እንደነበረው ፓተርን እየሆነ መጣ። ከዚህ በፊት የነበሩ እኛ ሌሎች ተመሳሳይ ዶክመንት በትሪፕል ወርክአውት ቢያደርግም የወጡ ዶክመንቶች አሉና እነዚህ ነገሮች እየተደጋገሙ በሄዱ ቁጥር የአማራ ጉዳይ ኦፍ ደ ራዳር የመሆን እድሉ ከፍተኛ ስለሆነ አትሊስት ሌትስ ኪፕ ደ አጀንዳ ላይቭ እና ሌትስ ጌት ሰም ፒፕል እነን አማራ የሆኑ ሰዎች ኢንዶርስ የሚያደርጓቸው የተወሰኑ ነገሮችን እናገኝ ሰቻዝ ነው። የቴሌኮሙኒኬሽን ብላክአውቱ መነሳት አለበት። አማራ ክልል ማለቱ ሳንክሽን መደረግ አለባቸው። ዶስ አር ቲንግስ ዘይ ውድንት ሴይ አዘርዋይዝ። እነሱ ነገሮች መባላቸው በራሱ ኢትስ ስቴፕ በቂ ናቸው። በቂ ሄደዋል። አይ ቲንክ አልቆፓም ሌሎችም እንዳነሱት በቂ አልሄዱም። ትክክል ነው። ግን እነሱ መባላቸው በራሱ አንድ ጠቀሜታ ነው። ሁለተኛ ሌጂትሜት የሆነ አክተር እና ነው በፕሮሰሱን ዲስትራፕት ከማድረግ ባለፈ ታንጀብል የሆኑ ፖሊሲ አክሽኖችን ፑሽ የሚያደርግ ኮሌክቲቭ ሆኖ ለመታየትም ሰምታይምስ በዚህ ሂደት አልፎ ኦብዘርቨብል መሆኑ የራሱ ጠቀሜታ ስላለው ፕላስ ደግሞ እነዚህ ያነሳናቸው የተወሰኑ ነገሮች እኛ በልዩ ሁኔታ ጠይቀን ያስገባናቸው ከመሆናቸው ጋር ተያይዞ ጠቀሜታ አለው ብለን ስላሰብና ኦልተርኔቲቭ የበለጠ ሳይድ ላይን የማድረግ አማራውን አጀንዳ የአማራውን ኮሚኒቲ ሳይድ ላይን የማድረግ ፖቴንሻል ስላለው ያን ይሻላል ብለን ስላሰብን ነው ብለን ይህን በተደጋጋሚ ነው የምትሄድም እየተናገርን ነው እና ግን ኢትስ ትሬድ ኦፍ ኢትስ ዋን አፕሮች ታፍ ኮል ነው ያለው። ለዛ ነው አይ ቲንክ some people may say like it would have been better to work off ኮንስኩዌንሱ ራሱ ኮርነር ብንደረግ ይሻላል ምናምን that's one way of looking at it። ግን ከኛን ግን ያየነውን የአድቫንቴጅ እና ዲስአድቫንቴጅ ግምገማ እንድታውቁት ለማድረግ ነው። ከዛ ውጭ ግን ያው የትሬድ ኦፍ ስለሆነ ይህኛው አማራጭ አይሻልም ነበር ወይ የሚል አተያይ ያላቸው ሰዎች ሊኖሩ እንደሚችሉ እናውቃለን። honestly we respect that, but that's like you are in one position and you take all the information you have and you make a decision and you explain that. That's what we're doing. ከዚህ ከስብስቡ ጋር ተያይዞ ከዚህ በፊት እንደዚህ ያደረጉ ሰዎች ነበሩ ወይ? ትክክል ነው። ተመሳሳይ ስብስብ ነው። ኢትስ ኖት ሴክሬት። ቅድም እንዳልኩት ይህን ስብስብ ኢኔን ወይ ሰስቴን የማድረግ ፍላጎት የለንም። and we don't think it's ሎንግ ላስቲንግ ስብስብ ነው ብለን አናስብም። ግን the only reason በዚህ ስብስብ ውስጥ በዚህ ሂደት ውስጥ ማለፍ ያስፈለገው there was a request, a repeated request actually from State Department side, knowing that we know የተወሰኑ ነገሮችን አትስማሙም እናንተ የምትሉንም እንሰማለን። ነገር ግን ደግሞ እንደ ኮሌክቲቭ የምትስማሙባቸውን ነገሮች ማወቅ እንፈልጋለን። ምንም የምትስማሙባቸውን ነገሮች እስኪ ይሄንን አውጡልን ተብሎ የተሰጠው። ስለዚህ በዛ አግባብ በዛ ያንን ሪኩዌስት መሰረት ተደርጎ የተሰራ ነው። ኢትስ ናት ገና ሪፕሌስ የእኛን ሴፓሬት አድቮኬሲ እና ሴፓሬት ኢንጌጅመንት ያ ነገር ይቀጥላል። ስለዚህ በዛ ሂደት ለምን ከዚህ በፊት የነበሩ ሬድ ፍላጎች መሰረት አድርጋችሁ ለምን ከኮሌክቲቭ ዲስኢንጌጅ ማድረግ አይሻልም ነበሩ የሚለው ቅድም ካልኩት ኦፍ ዘ ራዳር የሆነ የመሄድ ፖቴንሻል ስላለው እና የተወሰኑ ነገሮችን በሌሎች ነን አማራ በሆኑት ኮሚኒቲዎች ኢንዶርስ መደረጉ አድቫንቴጅ ስላለው እና ሪኩዌስቱም ከተለያዩ አካላቶች ከመምጣቱ አንጻር እና ኮንሲኩዌንሱንም የተወሰነ ገምግመን እነዚህን መሰረት አድርገን የወሰነው ውሳኔ ነው እንጂ ኢትስ ናት አወር ቾይስ። ከዚህ ከነበረን ሪሌሽንሽፕ ካየነው በሚቲንጎች በስብሰባዎች በምናምን ከተረዳነው ነገር በዚህ ኮሌክቲቭ የመሳተፍ ፍላጎት የለንም። we are not member of any collective። ግን ሌሎች ኮሚኒቲዎች ግን they have a coalition and they are doing advocacy. So tactically they know counter የምናደርገው ያለን that's a separate conversation that we should not discuss here. Again, it's just a fact and we are working with what's provided until we change the dynamics. ያንን መሰረት አድርገን መንቀሳቀስ መቻል አለብን። ይሄ ደግሞ እዚህ ዲያስፖራው ላይ ያለ ብቻ ሳይሆን በተወሰነ ኤክስተንት ሀገር ቤትም ያለውን ፖለቲካል ዳይናሚክስ ሪፍሌክት የሚያደርግ እንደሆነ እና ኢትስ ኖት ሜኪንግ ኦፍ ትሪፕል ኤ ኦር ያሉት ዲያስፖራ ኦርጋናይዜሽኖች ኢትስ ኖት ዩኒክ ቱ ኮንቴክስት እንደ ዩኤስ ኢትስ ጀነራል የአሜሪካውን እንደ ኢትዮጵያን ፖለቲካል ዳይናሚክስ የሀይል አስተላለፍ ያየ ሰው ሊጠብቀው የሚችለው ሀይል አስተላለፍ ነው። አማራጭ የሆኑ አስተላለፎችን ለመምጣት መስራት ያስፈልጋል። and that's what will be focused on. ሚዛን የሚደፋው ትቶ መውጣቱ አይሻልም ነበር ወይ የሚለውን እንግዲህ ቅድም እንዳልኩት ነው። በተደጋጋሚ ምክንያቶችን ሰጥተናል። ከዛ አንጻር ይሄንን ሳይን አፕ አድርጎ ኦን ደ ሳይድ የኛን ሴፓሬት ኢንጌጅመንት እንትን እያጠናከርን መሄድ ነው ብለን ነው የምናስበው። ከዛ ውጭ ሌሎቹን ኮሚኒቲዎች ሌጂቲማታይዝ ማድረግ አይሆንም ወይ የሚለው አይ ዶንት ቲንክ ዳትስ ኬስ። ምክንያቱም ኢቨን ኢን ዳይሬክት በሚኖረን ኢንጌጅመንት ዌር ኦልዌይስ ሚቲንግ ሴቲንጉ ላይ ብታዩት ዌር ኦልዌይስ ኦን ምድር የሚባለው ዲፌንድ እያደረግን ያለ ነው እኛንን የምንሆነው እና ዳይናሚክሱ ኦልሬዲ ፕሪኤግዚስት የሚያደርግ ነገር ነው እና ኦፕሽኑ ዝም ብለን ወጥተን let's just watch from the side or let's try to build our capacity ቢልድ እያደረግን in the meantime እነዚህ ነገሮች ፑሽ እያደረግን በጊዜ ሂደት ደግሞ ነገሮች መቀያየር የሚያመጣው ለውጥ ተደማምሮ መሬት ላይ ያለውን ሲቹዌሽን የተቀየረ ሲሄድ የተሻሉ ድማንዶችን እያወጣን መሄድ መቻል አለብን። እያቀረብን ዊን ማድረግ ይሻላል የሚል አፕሮች ነው። this are like tactical moves in a way እና በዛ ካልኩሌሽን ነው ውሳኔያችን መሰረት ያደረግነው። ግን እነዚህ ግሩፖች as long as they have a community they represent triple እንትን they're not necessarily being legitimatized by our involvement ምክንያቱም ሌጂቲሜሲያቸው ስታንድ የሚያደርገው on a different matrix ስለሆነ however that is problematic, however it is inappropriate and very like civic organization advocacy ጋር ችግር ቢኖርበትም ግን it's not up to us ሌሎች አካላቶች ናቸው ይህንን ሌጂቲሜሲያቸውን ጀጅ የሚያደርጉት in terms of representing community ማለት ነው። so concern ተገቢ ነው ግን I think we don't believe ካላቸው በላይ የተለየ ሌጂቲሜሲ የሰጠናቸው ነው ብለን አናስብም። but when they do speak genocidal remark we will continue to take harsh stand and that was I think noted and unlike the past this time around we didn't witness the similar kind of genocidal remark. It's unfortunate ወደዛ ደረጃ ስታንዳርዱ ዝቅ ማለቱ ግን I think it's also worth noting that our action in the past was noted and has also influenced this process. ያን ማለት ስለፈለኩ ነው። Thank you. Maybe should I let Ted speak now, Robin, because he can't hear you, right?
Yeah, sure. Hold on.
Ted, please go ahead and add a few things, and then we can.
I think, Hone, you covered it all. I mean, what's important for everyone to understand here is that this is not a political negotiation. AAA as a civic organization registered here in the U.S. does not represent, or any of the civic organizations here in the U.S. do not represent any political organization in Ethiopia or armed group or any of the organizations that participate in these discussions. So this is, it's very typical for the State Department. I mean, first, it is a constant engagement for us to engage the State Department, U.S. members of Congress. It's almost on a daily basis that we are engaging on Amhara issues. It's not a day that goes by. And that's why we made a significant investment in hiring a lobbying firm in D.C. But just the same, the other groups are also constantly engaged, just like us, advocating their issues, as well as the Abiy regime. So, in fact, the biggest investor is the Abiy regime because they spend much more money than all of us in lobbying Congress and the State Department. So the other groups also do that as well. As we said before, it's critically important that all Amharas, especially the organizations, be active in engaging their congressional representatives. So this is not a political negotiation. It is not a negotiation to end fighting. It is not a negotiation to bring about peace or anything like that. The State Department goes to advocacy groups, Ethiopians, non-Ethiopians, for policy recommendations. And often they will ask, the various groups if they can come, with a few recommendations that they can push for. In terms of like here in the, Ethiopian American diaspora groups, it is extremely competitive. There are other groups are actively engaged as much as we are. We win some and some we don't, but it requires almost a daily engagement, and it's very exhausting. So when state came up and requested this, yes, we did. We walked out of that first meeting. It was not easy. It was several hours of back and forth. That back and forth was just not with the Ethiopian diaspora groups, but that back and forth also included with State Department officials, and I'm referring here to the meeting in San Diego. We strongly advocate and push for core Amhara issues. And now when we were going back and forth this time, majority of it was over just virtual discussion. It was not in a in-person meeting. Now, if it was not easy, and I think we're not here saying that some of these criticisms are wrong. We could have said nope. We will not. We will after going back and forth and including some of the issues that we wanted, we could have pulled out, and then it would have most likely reverted to the original draft. The result of that would have been inclusion of several, statements that would have definitely, angered us as an organization and angered our community. So it's a difficult and challenging task, but we ultimately what we had to do was ask ourselves, are the things that we included here, these points here, would our people, benefit from it? And that's why we push for that. And maybe I'm, repeating myself. In terms of some of these organizations that are that are active here, the other Ethiopian diaspora groups, some of them have been doing the advocacy work for quite some time, for several years. Their legitimacy. We don't engage with them. We don't talk to them, hardly at all. But they do engage their representatives. They do engage the human rights community. So in terms of if they're seen as a serious organization, it's based on their level of engagement and the results that they bring about. It's really not from their engagement, from whether we engage or disengage with them. It's not from that. And that's just really the reality of the situation, unfortunately. It is a situation where there are groups who think, who have a very negative narrative of Amharas, are out there actively, engaged in advocacy. But that means that we really have to increase our level of advocacy here, not just in the U.S., but across the globe. So I think it's important to note that these groups are very, very active. And have been. We know this. That's why we felt it was incredibly important to organize as Amharas. That's why it was, critically important to put our narrative out there and in our language, in Amharic, and also in English. And to an extent, we have been much more successful than we were in the past because we were not organized. I think I've covered maybe some of the points, and this doesn't end our engagement. It doesn't end our engagement in terms of not just with the State Department, but also with members of Congress. We're pushing for a hearing by the by Congress on Ethiopia, and in our engagement a few weeks ago, there are several members of Congress that were receptive to the idea of holding a hearing because many members of Congress were sold on the idea that the Pretoria agreement would bring about lasting peace and would hail transition Ethiopia away from war into peace and potentially a new form of a different type of government where human rights atrocities would not be committed. And this is a wake-up call for all of them. And we told them that many of them are very familiar with the statements that were released, condemning the Pretoria Agreement, and that was an exclusionary process. So they're receptive to it, and we're going to continue to push for a hearing on Ethiopia, and also on legislation on Ethiopia as well, where the focus will be on our issues, on Amhara issues, because, Amharas are the ones predominantly bearing the brunt of Abiy's, genocidal, policies. So this is something that we're going to continue to do. But, we had to make a calculation whether, we participate in this and to see if this will help alleviate the suffering of Amharas, or we stay out of this process, and then a point or a recommendation would be presented to the State Department and to the Foreign Affairs Committee members that would be very harmful to Amharas. And so this was the calculation that we had to make. It is not it is not pretty. It's not something, if we had to do it ourselves on our own, this is not what would be the case. But we were put into a situation where we had to try to get as much out as we can. And so we removed several things from that initial draft that would have been very harmful. Okay, I'll stop there.
Okay. Thanks, Hona and Ted. I see that we have a lot of requests, but our intention with this space was to keep it very brief. So we're going to give an opportunity for everyone on stage to ask their question, but we're going to have to end the space afterwards. So if there are those who had a question and did not get a chance to have it addressed, please feel free to send it to us by direct message. Otherwise, I'm going to try and give an opportunity for everybody on the stage to ask a question. I just ask that you please keep it very, very brief, if possible under a minute. If it's possible to make it even shorter, that would be great. Just one question per speaker. I'm going to start with May Addis, or Amhara Fano.
Hi, thank you. And thank you guys for the work you're doing. So my question is, when I think of the problem in Ethiopia, especially with Amharas, it's basically a terrorist government, right? And that is basically taking away the people's citizenship, and that is constitutionalized, meaning they are forcefully evicting people from different regions where the government officials are saying they are illegal to be in those places, which is basically the Constitution itself, and the problem is systemic, right? And so and when I listen to the Fano's statements, their minimum to quit fighting is that everyone's citizenship is restored, meaning any Ethiopian should be able to live, have property, everything, in anywhere in the country, and the Constitution be removed. That's basically my understanding of their statement. So I want to know, have you raised these issues, which is the system itself, number one, because I feel like, even if you get the 7 or 8 or whatever other issues you raised and that you have, even though they are helpful, it will not stop the terrorism, which is what we have. And the TPLF and the OLF do not have a right to terrorize everybody else, even though that's what they campaign for. And these things are a U.S. issue because they've been participating in instituting the Constitution. And based on my discussions with some U.S. officials, my understanding is we are not raising these issues enough. Only the TPLF and the OLF are adamant about continuing it, but there's no serious resistance on that point. So I want to know if these issues have been raised, and if they haven't, how can we raise them in the future beyond, personally, I raise them. I hope everybody here raises these issues, call your representatives, but also if you can, how do you manage that process as you guys being the, basically being the representatives or the AAA organized group? Thanks.
Thank you, May Abdis. Next, I'm going to give an opportunity for Queenie. Queenie, you can go ahead.
ቴንክ ዩ ሮቤል ቴድ እንድ ሆነ እኔ በአማርኛ ነው ማውራት የምፈልገው በፍጥነት ይሄን ነገር ለመመለስ ወደዚህ ስለመጣችሁ በጣም አመሰግናለሁ እንደ አንድ አማራ ባይ ዘ ዌይ ቢኒያም አዳርገኝ እያለ ነው ቢኒያም ካየው ቴክስትህን ንገሪልኝ ስላለኝ ነው ኦኬ ወደ ጥያቄ ይገባለሁ አንድ ጥያቄ ነው ያልከው ግን እኔ መልቲፕል ኩዌስችን ነው ያለኝ በጣም ይቅርታ ምክንያቱም ከዚህ የበለጠ ጊዜ ላገኝ ስለማልችል ማለት ነው እናንተን ለማግኘት ምክንያቱም ጥያቄው ቢደጋገምም ሁሉ ሰው ማወቅና መስማት ስላለበት ማለት ነው እኔ አሁን ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ባለው የፋኖ ስትራግል እሱ ለአድቮኬሲው በጣም ቢግ ሌቨሬጅ ነው ስለዚህ እሱን ተጠቅማችሁ ጥላችሁ በባለፈው ጥላችሁ ወጣችሁት we I appreciate personally በተለይ ፖይንቶቹን ስለታዩ አሁንም ያለው ምን ያህልስ አሁን አድቮኬሲ ሰራ ከውስጥ ያለውንና ያንን ሰምታችሁ አምፕሊፋይ የምታረጉት ሶ እንዴት ሆኖ ነው የህዝቡ ድምጽ ይጠቅማል ብላችሁ እዚህ ፖይንት ላይ ተስማምታችሁ ልትወጡ የቻላችሁት የሚለው ነው አንደኛው ሌላው ደግሞ ማይ ካመር ኢትዮጵያ ሂዶ ገዱና በጣም ይቅርታ ሴንሲቲቭ ከሆነ ጥያቄው ማለት ነው በጣም ይቅርታ መጀመሪያ ይቅርታዬን ተቀበሉኝና ነው ከዛ መቀጥለው ማይ ካመር ኢትዮጵያ ሂዶ ገዱና አናግሮታል እናንተም ደግሞ ከሱ ጋር ያው ተነጋገሩ እንደነበረ አይተናል እሱንም ደግሞ ያው የሚጠቅም ነገር ነው ያላችሁ ብለን ስላሰብን እናመሰግናችሁ ነበረ ምንም እኔ ምንም የተነጋገራችሁትን ሳላቅ ቴንኪው ነበረ አሁን ዳሚንስ በእናንተና በገዱ መካከል ሪሌሽንሺፕ አለ ወይ አብራችሁ ነው ወይ የምትሰሩት ይሄን ባጭሩ ብትገልጹልኝ ደስ ይለኛል ሌላው የአማራ አይዲፒ በጣም ብዙ ነው የተራበው in millions 20 millions ትዊትስ ሲደረግ የነበረው ከላስቲር ጀምሮ አሁን ደግሞ ሊብስ ይችላል ምክንያቱም የደረሰ እህላቸውን ሁሉ የራሳቸውን ከብት ያመጡ የነዱበት በጣም ችግር ላይ ነው ያለው የአማራ ህዝብ in millions ሌላው ስለተረዳ ችግር የለብኝም የትግራይ በተለየ የሚለው ችግር ላይ ኖርብኝ ይችላል ግን እንዴት ነው ያማራውስ የተለየ ያልሆነው ይሄንን ለምንድን ነው ዛው ዲማንድ ማድረግ ያልተቻለው ሌላው ደግሞ ምጠይቀው ማለት ነው ወደፊት እናንተ የህዝቡን ከሆነ ጥያቄ ይዛችሁ እንትን የምትሉ በሚሰጣችሁ ታይም ፍሬም ውስጥ ለምን አትሊስት እንኳን እንደው ኦርጋናይዜሽኖችን ኦር አክቲቭሊ ኢንጌጅድ የሆነውን ሰው ሰብስባችሁ እንደዚህ ሚቲንግ ይኖራል እንደዚህ ጥያቄዎች ይመጣሉ ብላችሁ ያንን አሰስ አርጋችሁ you know first you collect the data then you analyze and then you gonna come for decision so without any analyzing any collecting data እንዴት ነው እንደዚህ አይነት ነገር ይዘው ሲመጡ እናንተ እዛ ላይ ደግሞ ይዛችሁ ቁጭ የምትሉት ተስማምታችሁ ምትወጡት በጣም ይቅርታ እኔ አድቮኬሲ እንዴት እንደሚሰራ በራሴ ልምድ እየወሰድኩኝ ነው ስለዚህ ይሄንን ለወደፊት በምን መልኩ እንደምትሰሩት ሌላው ፒስ አግሪመንት የሚለው ስለ ፕሪቶሪያው ፒስ አግሪመንት ነው የምታወሩት አቤት
if you could please wrap up because we said one
Sure.
question you've given us multiple but please wrap up just so we can give an opportunity for everybody
okay ምክንያቱም ስላልተነሱ ነው በጣም ይቅርታ ሮቤል እና ፒስ አግሪመንት የሚለው ስለ ፕሪቶሪያ ነው ወይ የሚያወራው 6ኛው እና 7ኛው ራስ በራሱ ስለተጋጨ እንዴት አርጋችሁ እሱ እንትን የምትሉት ኔጎሺዬሽን ካብይ ጋር ነው ወይ ቁጭ ተብሎ ዲያሎግ የሚደረገው ከፋሽስቱ ከገዳዩ ከጄኖሳይደሩ ነው ወይ ጄኖሳይድ ትላላችሁ ወረቀቱ ላይ ግን እኔ የአማራ ጄኖሳይድ የሚል አላየሁም ሶ እነዚህ ናቸው ጥያቄዎቹ
thank you
Robert, maybe I think one of the questions need to be answered right away. Clinical ተቀሽው የባዴን ባለስልጣን ጋር ምንም አይነት ግንኙነት አድርገን አናውቅም ምንም አይነት ኮሚኒኬሽንም የለንም and that should be clear in the triple in fact when የተወሰኑ ይሄ ኢቨን 2018 ለውጡ መጣ በሚባልበት ሰዓት ራሱ we were among the ones refuse ካደረግን ግንኙነት ከማድረግ በዲያስፖራ ካሉ ድርጅቶች ውስጥ ግንኙነት ማድረግን በግል ተቃውመን ሪጀክት ካደረጉ ስብስቦች ውስጥ አንዱ ነን እና in case anyone leaves this room after you ask, I just want to get them that right. ምንም አይነት ግንኙነት የለንም and we're not aware of who Mike Hammer met and who he didn't. ከተባለው ሰውም ጋር ይገናኝ አይገናኝ የምናውቀው ነገር የለንም ግን we never had any interaction with that person. So that should be clear. ሌሎቹ ጥያቄዎች ወደ መጨረሻ እንመለስባቸው እንችላለን.
Okay. Next, Ligabo.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for trying to answer some of our questions. I think, first, I would like to start, by saying that, I don't think we should undermine, this process. It's like a root level processes led by the U.S. government to understand, the true cause of the Amhara people. So, in any means, we should be able to win these battles. This is a political battle. So, to go to my question, my first question is, what is our threshold when it's come to negotiating or political discussion about Amhara? What's our red line? What's our threshold? As far as I understand, our thresholds are the recognition of Amhara genocide, which are being committed by the state for the last 5 years. So we also have existential threat. We have a question about political representation. Above all, we have a question about justice for the people of Amhara who are massacred, ethnically displaced, the people who are banned their access to human rights. So why wasn't all these topics being included in the discussion? So my first question is, what's our threshold? Second, do you think your presence and consensus to the statement uplift the Fano struggle or degrade the cause they are fighting for? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, I think from here we can maybe just take the last two question askers and then we can do one collective response. So next, Bahari.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to help you here. This is someone's process and it is at the end of the implementation. That's why it is being pushed by the executives. So የህወሓትና የሌሎች ሎቢ የፖስት ፕሪቶሪያ ፕሮሰስ ላይ ዳሜጅ ኮንትሮሉ ላይ ነው እናንተ ያላችሁት። እንደ አጋጣሚ ያው ኢምፕሊሜንቴሽኑ ላይ ጦርነት በርስታው ስላደረገ ማለት ነው። So whatever agenda I accept here, it's not good. ይህን ለምን ተቀበላችሁ ወይም ይህን እንትን አላችሁ የሚለው ብዙ ማተር አያደርግም because this is not our lobby. This is not our agenda. This is not how the lobby works. You lobby, you expect an outcome. You engage on someone's process, that's fine. But አሁን ቴድሮስ ያለው ነገር ደስ ብሎኛል። Starting from the bottom, from the legislative body ላይ ሌላ ፕሮሰስ ኢኒሺየት ማድረግ ኤክስትሪምሊ ኢምፖርታንት ነው። በሁለተኛ ደረጃ እሱ ላይም ራሱ አጀንዳው ላይ እኛ ወንድሞቻችሁ ነን፣ የፈለገ ነገር ቢሆን አንጠላችሁም፣ ፕሊስ እንወያይ። አይዲያ ብዙ ጊዜ ሰው ፍጹም አይደለም። ደጋግመን እንትን ስንለው ጥሩ እንትን ዲቨሎፕ እናደርጋለን። ስለዚህ እንወያይ። ሁለተኛው ምንድነው እንወያይ የምልበት ምክንያት መሬት ላይ ያለው እንትን ኦልሞስት ሪቮሉሽን ነው። We are saying that the only way to resolve our differences is through the gun. So our advocacy, our lobby should commensurate, should በዛ ሌቭል መሆን አለበት ማለት ነው።
Hi, Bahari, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Ona, do you hear him? Ted?
No, I can't hear him.
Okay.
Hello. ይሰማል?
Okay.
ስልክ ገብቶ ነው?
Yes, ይሰማል።
ውጤቶች ላይ መሆን የለበትም ማለት ምንድነው? ውጤቶች ለምሳሌ የሚሞቱ ሰዎች የመሳሰሉት ነገሮች እንትን ውጤት
Hi, Bahari. We can't hear you again. Okay, maybe. I think there might be a connection problem. Bahari, are you able to speak?
On muted, no, he's muted, so maybe we should go to the next person.
I can. I'm sorry, ስልክ እየገባብኝ ሆኖ ነው። ስለዚህ ምንድን ነው የመጀመሪያው ነገር እንትናችን ዲስረፕቲቭ መሆን አለበት፣ ስትሮንግ አጀንዳ ኤንድ ስታርት ፍሮም ዘ ባረም። እዚህ ፕሮሰስ ላይ ግን በተወሰነ መልኩ ዳሜጁ አፌክት እንዳያደረገን እና ያው አክቲቭሊ ኢንጌጅ ማድረጉ ጥሩ ነው ነው የምለው። ዲስ ኢዝ ኖት አወርስ። በግልጽ መነጋገር አለብን። የሌላ ፕሮሰስ ላይ ነው ያለ ነው። ቢኮዝ እንደዛ ባይሆን ኖሮ እኛ ጦርነት ላይ ነን። ከቤቱ እያንዳንዱ ጦርነት እየሸሸ እየወጣ እየተራበ ስለሆነ ስንዴ ያስፈልገዋል፣ መድኃኒት ያስፈልገዋል። there's nothing ours here. ይሄን ለማለት ነው። አመሰግናለሁ። ይቅርታ።
Okay. Thank you, Bahari. And lastly, so Darissa, I think we've taken questions from about 4 people already. So, Darissa, if you can make your question very brief, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
እሺ አመሰግናለሁኝ። እኔ ጥያቄ ያለኝ ለአቶ ሆነ ነው ለዶክተር ሆነ ነው። ይቅርታ እዚህ ስትሰበሰቡና ስታናግሯቸው እነዚህ ፈረንጆቹ እናንተንም ሌሎቹንም ሎቢ ግሩፕስ እንደሚያናግሩ ጠቅሰህልናል እና ምንድነው ዋትስ ዩር ሪዲንግ? ምክንያቱም አሁን አዲስ አምባሳደር ተሹሟል፣ የጄኔቫው ኮሚሽን ተዘግቷል። ኢትዮጵያ ላይ የነበረው ኢንኳይሪ ግማሹን ወደ 600 ምናምን ሚሊዮን ዶላር ዩሮ አውሮፓ ህብረት ሰጥቷል እና ከዚህ ረዥም ጋራ ኖርማላይዝ እያደረጉ ይመስላል እና ይሄ ረዥም ስቴብል ነው ረጅም ጊዜ ይሄዳል ብለው የሚያስቡ አይነት ሰዎች ናቸው። ሌላ እዚሁ ጋራ ይሄ ናሽናል ዳያሎግ የሚባለው ምንድን ነው ፋይዳው ብለው ነው የሚያስቡት? ታንክ ዩ።
ኦኬ ታንክ ዩ። Maybe if you can tell Ted to go ahead if he wants to speak.
Yeah. Ted, maybe we can start with you.
Okay. I'll go on ahead and get started. And there's a lot of questions, so I'm sure I won't be able to do justice to all of them. And Hone and Robel, both of you can jump in. May I just raise an important issue, which is the issue of the Constitution, this ethnic apartheid Constitution that was imposed on by the TPLF on the Ethiopian people. She was asking if this is something that we have raised, and have we raised this? I mean, since the establishment of AAA in 2016, we began engaging members of Congress. We have been, bringing this up to all members of Congress. Essentially, what we have been saying is that Amharas across all of Ethiopia are stateless in their own country. They essentially have no rights at all. And because of that, even in areas where they are a majority, population-wise, they have been made a minority politically because of this constitution, not just the federal constitution, but also the regional constitutions. And we have went to great length to educate congressional members, staffers, State Department officials, human rights organizations about the impact of the both federal and state regional constitutions on the Amhara people. Oftentimes, our people bring up the federal constitution when they're doing advocacy, that neglect the regional constitutions, which have, much more even consequential impact on the Amhara people. And so because of that, not all, but a few members of Congress, have come to know about the Constitution. Now, privately, they agree. They say this is a terrible Constitution. They do not. So they think it will not. That it will lead to, the marginalization of minority groups. It will lead to ethnic-based war and tension. They agree with that. But what they are afraid to do, many of them, is that to publicly say this, because they will feel like they are telling an African country how to what type of a government system that they should have. And this is something that they've told us privately. They said they can have this conversation privately, but they are concerned about saying this publicly, and also putting this in a legislation. But this is something that we bring up, all the time, because it has, a dire impact on our people. I wish that more and more of Amaras would do this. It would really be helpful in terms of educating, and it is not an easy thing to educate. Now, on the other hand, you have other groups that actually advocate for this constitution, unfortunately. But that's the reality of it. They are going there and advocating, and they, and they will say, what Amaras wants is they want to get rid of this constitution and have a unitary-based system with one religion, one language. And then we have to go back and say, no, that is not true. Ethiopia has always been a very diverse country, ethnically, diverse country religiously, diverse country culturally, diverse country linguistically, and did not have these issues under a federal regional system. However, since this ethnic apartheid system was imposed, we have had all these issues, especially a genocide that has been committed against the Amhara people, and atrocities against many other Ethiopians who have been politically marginalized by this constitution. So what we have asked many members of Congress was, in the same way that they condemned the South African apartheid system, we have asked them to condemn the Ethiopian ethnic apartheid system. And we have also asked, human rights organizations to do the same. Part of the reason why they haven't gone to that length is, one, I don't think as a community we have done a good job in being and speaking out. We may do so in protest. There might be some writings, a few writings out there, but we don't engage policymakers, human rights organization on this issue. But then you have other groups that are engaging policymakers, think tanks, human rights organizations, saying, no, this is a great constitution. And it allows us to have local administration where we can exercise our culture, our language. So it is a challenge, but we will continue to push that, because this ethnic-based system, apartheid system, that has consequential impact on our people, as we've seen in Metekel, as we've seen in Raya, Walgait, Walega, Addis Ababa, and Dera. I can go on and on and on. In terms of Hammer, when Hammer travels to Ethiopia, he meets with Ethiopian officials. Have we met with any of the Ethiopian officials that he's met with? No, we don't have any interaction with any of the Ethiopian officials at all, whether they are, so the Central Prosperity Party or the regional Amhara Prosperity Party members. We don't. But what we do ask and demand of Hammer and other state officials as they travel to Ethiopia is that they meet with, Amharas who are sincerely advocating for the Amhara people. So we do demand that, and then and we do give names. At this present moment, it is very challenging, because many of those Amharas whose names that we would give are arrested. They're behind bars. They're in jail. And then also some of them have taken up arms and have joined the Fanos. But those that would be politicians are actually and journalists. Many of them are in jail, as we all know. Christian Tadella and and many of the other journalists are behind bars. So there was a good question asked about the humanitarian situation for Amharas. This is something that we raise. This is something that we raise every time we speak with human rights organizations, with State Department, Congress, think tank groups, journalists. this is something that we bring about, that we voice all the time. And in fact, the State Department and USAID is going to be briefing the Foreign Affairs Committee members. And so one of the things that they've asked for us is, can you give us questions to ask them? And we've provided several questions for them to ask, especially with USAID in terms of providing humanitarian assistance, to Amharas. Recently, even BBC Amharic came out with a report that, over 40 Amharas have died as a result of hunger in Wagamra and North Gondar. But we know that's just a small number, that there are probably thousands of Amharas dying as a result of, lack of food within Amhara region alone, not to say outside of the region, right? So this is something that we bring up. It is a huge cost for us. As also working with other Amhara, organizations across the globe, when we instituted the Amhara Emergency Fund through FANA, we provided free meals to over 150,000 internally displaced people, Amhara IDPs, free meals, in addition to providing free medical treatment and psychotherapy treatment for over 1,000 Amhara women that were raped by the TPLF. So not only do we speak to policymakers and human rights organizations about this, but we also work with other human rights organizations to deliver humanitarian aid. We used to. Now it's impossible to do so, but we did that during the war. So we do it ourselves as well. One of the things the questioner asked, does our participation, I think this was Ligbao, help or diminish the Amhara struggle of the Fano? We definitely believe it helps in the Amhara struggle for the of the Fanos, but just the Amhara struggle in general. If we did not organize and began advocating for Amharas, broadly the international community would be unaware of the Amhara struggle, the Amhara movement, what we are doing as a people, what our people are facing. So, in that meeting before Hammer went, to Ethiopia in August, I told him about who Fanos are, what they are doing, what they are fighting for, and that they are just everyday people who have picked up arms in the same way that they have done for thousands of years to defend themselves, their families, and their community from a threat. And so it is up to us to explain to the international community who we are. And part of who we are, part of our identity, is being a Fano. And in that conversation with Hammer before he traveled to Ethiopia, I told him I and all the Amharas present in that meeting are also all Fanos. All Amharas across the globe now are Fanos because we are facing an existential threat. The survival of us as a people is at risk, and so we all are contributing for our survival. So I told them, see us as Fanos, all of us here present. So we believe it does support the Fano struggle, but the Amhara movement in general, because it is us to explain in words that the entire international community can understand who we are as a people, what we are fighting for, what our end goal is, and to continue to advocate. And it's not just with policymakers, everyone, but it's also with journalists. We take a huge effort. We make a huge effort to engage, Western media, whether that would be New York Times or Reuters or AP or appear on Al Jazeera or Fast 24 or TRT World. This is not easy, but we have an obligation to make sure that the international community understands what the struggle of our people are, especially at this time when you have a complete telecommunication blackout, in Amhara region, and even in areas where Amharas are the largest population, like we see it in Dera, and then we also see it in Walega when there's about to be an attack. They can't speak for themselves. The journalists are also in jail. So we have to make that effort to go before the international community and represent our community. And all of you are capable of doing it. You know our issues better than anyone out there. You can go and engage journalists. You can go engage human rights organizations. You can go and engage your representatives that's here in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. and and educate them and lobby and advocate for them. That's something that we can do. You know, when it comes to like, you know, what's our threshold? You know, we will continue as an organization, and I believe as a people, for a recognition of what has happened to Amharas over the past 7 years constitutes a genocide. We'll continue to push that. The recognition of a genocide, unfortunately, by many countries, is a political decision. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but in some cases, that's the reality. Some groups, it has taken them, you know, years, you know, to get that recognition. But that's because they didn't give up. They push and they push and they push. The same thing with the Armenians, almost took them 100 years. The Jews here in the U.S., it took them a very long time to get the United States to, you know, recognize that what happened to the Jewish people in Germany constituted a genocide. If we can continue to advocate for our people, be united, be strong, we can overcome this and we can have that recognition because that recognition is critically important because it will help get justice and accountability. One of the things AAA did in February of this year was we filed a legal complaint with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on behalf of the Amhara people from the various Walega areas. You know, and a legal complaint when we have been, it's a process that took us almost 9 months to get there. But that's also one of the stepping stones for us to get this legal recognition of a genocide and accountability and justice. It is not easy, everyone. We just started organizing as a people a few years ago. We have come a very, very long way, but we still have more, you know, a longer way to go, you know, to stop this genocide, but then and to get justice and accountability. But when you see what's happening on the ground in Ethiopia, in every Kabbalah, responding to these you know, to this war on Amaras, defending themselves, fighting, people coming together. When you see the level of engagement here, even this criticism, when you see this here and people's interest, why, what happened, provide us the context, provide us the explanation. This is something positive. This is something that didn't exist, you know, 3, 4, 5 years ago. In fact, even 9 months ago, that it didn't exist. So to us, we see this as something, you know, positive, and that would help bring the end of the genocide that our people have been witnessing for 70 years, but we're just waking up right now, if we have to be frank. So I think the advocacy, not just by AAA, the other Amhara organizations across this country, the Amhara organizations, you know, across the globe, and individual Amharas, I think helps the Amhara movement, you know, in general. I want to make sure that, you know, I give Robel and Hone an opportunity to respond to some of these other questions. But one quick thing I do want to point to, respond to, is about, like, you know, when you meet with these, you know, policymakers, you know, how do you think, what is your reading in terms of, like, how they view the Abiy government? And because you see the EU re-engaging Abiy and providing, you know, funding, you know, and financial funding, and it's a mix in terms of, like, what we see and what we observe. From many members of Congress, they still view Abiy in the same way. That's why we have met with members of Congress that believe a hearing is overdue and it's time, and that they're you know, asking for the State Department and the USAID for briefing in terms of, like, what's going on. We need an update. What's the status? Why is there a war? You know, did you foresee this war coming? You know, between Amaras, you know, and Abiy. With the State Department, there is more of a re-engagement since the Pretoria Agreement. And, you know, I have to be honest and be frank. And part of it is because, you know, Ambassador Hammer is the architect of this Pretoria Agreement. And because of that, he wanted to re-engage, you know, thinking he could, you know, get more out of Abiy. But also, at the end of the day, this is the government that exists, and they have no choice to meet with him and talk to him, even if they, even if they don't, if they prefer with another, government that was there. But with many members of Congress, they don't have to engage Abiy, like the State Department has. So they're much more critical of the Abiy administration. But we're pushing for more engagement on Abiy. I think they thought initially when with the Pretoria Agreement, they were distracted. We had to work hard to keep them engaged and say, no, there is going to be a war. Believe us, war is coming, because that was in our statements. We said that this exclusionary process will not bring about lasting peace. You see, human rights organizations still critical of Abiy. You see many of the think tanks that do not believe that Abiy can transition and change from from his mindset. That there's a term I forgot that was used by one of the foreign affairs members that we talked about in terms of like there are some leaders, dictatorial leaders, that feel that their longevity is based on them continuing to create instability within the country, and they believe that is a part of Abiy's mindset. But the State Department is a challenge because the way they view diplomacy is very different than the way Congress views diplomacy, and this is the challenge that we, as especially those of us who live in the U.S., have to overcome. The good thing about us living here in the U.S. is we live in a democracy. There, in 2024, there could be a new administration that comes in with a different foreign policy agenda, and we have an opportunity to influence that foreign policy agenda, towards Ethiopia, and specifically with regards to Amharas. And that means that we have to be engaged in that process right now. Not when it's in 2024, right now, with all the candidates that are running for Congress, all the candidates that are running for presidents, because you don't know who the president is going to be, next year when the election comes. It could be Biden, it could be Trump, it could be Ramaswamy, it could be, Kennedy, it could be any one of them. But it's then that means it's up to us to engage with all of them and educate them on who we are as a people, who we are as Amharas here living in the United States, and then also, why it's best and it's their interest to engage with Amhara community here in the U.S., and also, to engage with the Fanos in Ethiopia. So that's really all up to us, and I think we have the capacity to do it. We just have to be more engaged on advocacy, and that requires all of us to be engaged on advocacy, not just one organization, but all the organizations here in the, in the diaspora. I'll stop there. I'll turn it over to Hone and Robel.
Robel, do you want to go next, or should I go?
You can go ahead, Hone. I'll go after you.
I think the ጥያቄዎቹ በሙሉ አድሬስ የተደረጉ ይመስለኛል። አንዱ ፕሮባብሊ የሌሎች ድርጅቶች የተሳተፉት እነማን ናቸው የሚል ነበር እና እሱ አይ ቲንክ ስቴትመንቱም ላይ በአብሪቬሽን የተቀመጡ ድርጅቶች አሉ። እነሱን ማየት ነው። ኢንክሉዲንግ ኦላ ፍሮም ኮሮሞ፣ ኤፓክ፣ የኦጋዴን ተወካዮች፣ ትግራይ ተወካዮች፣ የሀረሬ እና አይ ቲንክ ሌሎች ኦርጋናይዜሽንስ እና እያንዳንዳቸውን ዝርዝራቸውን እዛ ላይ ማየት ይቻላል። ሶ ብሮድ ሊስት ሰፊ ሊስት ነው እዛ ውስጥ የነበረው። የናሽናል ዲያሎጉን በተመለከተ አይ ቲንክ ሆነስትሊ አት ዲስ ፖይንት ምዕራባውያን ናሽናል ዲያሎጉ ሰክሰስፉል እንደማይሆን አውቀዋል። ኢትስ ጀስት የኔ አረዳድ privately they have given up hope on Abiy. Just publicly they have to pretend like this man can hold it together. In my reading, of course, then the Zabalwal Malat Adam, from the interactions we have had and from what we see in the public domain, my understanding is they're just looking for an alternative force, and that's I think reflected in some of the the remarks we've heard in private meetings and all that from different actors. So the challenge is, even if they might assess Abiy will not be able to hold this thing together and will not defeat Amaras. I think there's a concern እንዴት ነው ሌሎቹን ኦልተርናቲቭ ኃይሉ እንዴት ነው ኮንፊገር የሚደረገው በሚለው ላይ ያተኮሩ ይመስለኛል። አንደርስታንድ የማደርገው ሶ ዳር የነወያኛውን አማራጭ ኃይል የመፈለግና እሱን ኃይል በተቻለ መጠን አንደርስታንድ አድርጎ ቢፎር ኤኒ ሲግኒፊካንት ፖሊሲ ሽፍት ያንን ኃይል አስተሳድጎ በደንብ ሪአሹር የማድረግ እንቅስቃሴ ላይ ናቸው ብዬ ነው የማስበው። እና ወደ አልተርኔቲቭ ማን ነው ምንድን ነው የሚለውን ያው ኦብቪየስሊ they would never say it, ግን the sentiment looks like they have come to realize that Abiy will never be able to govern this country any longer. He has miserably failed and failed several times. It's not clear who what the alternative force is. I think there are potential ኃይሎችን እያዩ ነው። So at the moment my understanding is እነዚህን ኃይሎች የመገምገም እና የማጥናት ስቴጅ ላይ ያሉ ይመስላል. And that's why it's critically important we become vocal at this point. ለተነሳው ጥያቄ
Can honey, before I forget my thoughts, just want to touch on that real quick before you move on to the next point. I agree with what Juan says in terms of like how many of the, how at least with the State Department in terms of how they view Abiy, part of the challenge though is also they see the challenge in here in the diaspora community and also in Ethiopia, and that there doesn't seem to be, for example, when Abiy came to power, they saw majority of Ethiopians coming together, that whole unity and so forth, where right now as a community here and in the diaspora and also in Ethiopia, we're very divided, right? It is a very divided community, and so it's a little bit of a challenge for them in terms of like, okay, what forces is out there, what communities out there that can maybe bring the collective Ethiopians together, and that we can work with that, and this is from their perspective, right? It's not from our perspective. That can, if Abiy was to be gone, that can hold this country together, and that's a very difficult question to answer, right? And this is sometimes some of these discussions that that we have, and there isn't really a force, an entity out there that has the backing of like what they would see as majority of Ethiopians that would be an alternative to Abiy. Go ahead, Holly.
I think ሌሎች ጥያቄዎች አዲስ የተደረጉ ይመስለኛል። የፋኑን በተመለከተ አገር ቤት ያለውን እንቅስቃሴ የሚለውን በቃል መጠየቅ ቢጠቀም ይሻላል። አገር ቤት ያለውን እንቅስቃሴ ወይም እነሱ የሚፈልጉትን ፕሮሞት ከማድረግ አንጻር ይሄኛው ሰነድ ምን ያክል ጠቃሚ ነው የሚለው ኢንፋክት ቀጥታ አንዳንዶቹ ዲማንዶች those are demands we got from the ground as well on a daily basis. necessarily ለዚህ ሚቲንግ ተብሎ ሳይሆን በየቀኑ አገር ቤት ያሉ ሰዎች ምንድነው አሜሪካ ማድረግ የምትችለው ማድረግ ያለባት የሚለውን በተመለከተ we do communicate, we do gather. I think it's important to remember that የዚህ የምናደርገው engagement as important as it is not only one. We do engage with people on the ground, people that are in organizations and all that. So part of the reason why የተወሰኑ ነገሮችን የማሰሙትም because those are reserved for certain processes, ግን እና time taking ስለሆነ አንዳንዶቹ ነገሮች ደግሞ you don't make decisions through space discussion. So basically input gather ማድረግ ያስፈልጋል, and we've been doing that. I think we're fairly accessible በተወሰነ ደረጃ በግለሰብ ደረጃም ስፔሶች በመምጣት እንደ ትሪፕሌም ስብስብ በመምጣት we try. ከዛ ባለፈ ግን ያው በኢንተርናል ሜምበርስ and decision making process ፌት የሚደረጉ ውሳኔዎችን መሰረት አድርገን ነው የምንንቀሳቀሰው እና we try to gather input from everyone members non-members broader community እና ሁሉ አሁንም በቅርቡ ያሰብነው ከሎቢንግ ፈርማችን ጋር በመሆን አድቮኬሲ ኤክስፒሪየንሱን እስካሁን ያጋጠሙ ቻሌንጆች ምንድናቸው የሚለውን ዌቢናር እናዘጋጃለን እና እሱንም የምትሳተፉበት እድል ይኖራል። So generally, if you have any ideas, come to us. We're always welcoming ideas. We're always taking on volunteers. እና ከኢንፑት ከመስጠት ባለፈም ዳይሬክትሊ ታስኮች ስብሰባዎች ላይ መሳተፍ የምችሉባቸው እድሎች ስላሉ ከቀጥታ ብታናግሩን የበለጠ ክሎዝሊ ጉዳዮችን የማወቅ እድል ይኖራችኋል ብዬ አስባለሁኝ። ቲንክ አጠቃላይ ግን እንደ አጠቃላይ ይሄኛው ነገር አንድ አድቮኬሲ ፕሮሰስ ነው፣ አንድ አውትካም ነው። አይ ቲንክ ባህሪ መሰለኝ ቅድም ያለው አልተርናቲቭ አቬኖችን መሄድ መቻል አለብን የሚለው አይ ቲንክ ዳትስ አን ኢምፖርታንት ፖይንት። ይሄ የስቴት ዲፓርትመንት እንደ አክተር ከዛም ባለፈ ደግሞ ይሄ ፕሮሰስ ኢዝ ጀስት ዋን በየቀኑ በርካታ የአድቮኬሲ አውትካም ሼፕ የሚደረገው ኢንፋክት ፕራይመሪሊ ወደ ሚዲያ ነው። ከሚዲያ ጋር የምናደርገው ኢንጌጅመንት ነው ሞስት ኮንስኮንሻል ብለን የምናስባለን። ምክንያቱም ብዙዎቹ የአድቮኬሲ ታርጌቶቻችን ኢንፎርሜሽንን ከኛ በተጨማሪ ሚዲያ ላይ ነው የሚያገኙት እና if we get our stories out through the media then that's reaching out to several people at the same time እና በዊዝን አድቮኬሲ ሰርክሉ እንደ ታርጌት ግሩፕ አድርገን የምንንቀሳቀሳቸው የአሜሪካ መንግስት ኦፊሻሎች ብቻ አይደሉም። በርካታ ቲንክ ታንክስ፣ ሂውማን ራይት ኦርጋናይዜሽንስ፣ ሚዲያስ አሉ እና ኦል ዶስ አር የአድቮኬሲ ውጤቱ የሚለካው ኮሌክቲቭሊ እነዚህ ነገሮች በሚሉት ነው እና ናሬቲቭም ሴት የሚደረገው እነዚህን የተለያዩ አክተሮቹን ኢንፍሉዌንስ በማድረግ ነው እንጂ ስቴት ዲፓርትመንት ብቻውን ዩኒላተራሊ as powerful they are እነሱ ራሱ they are part of the network of influence እና ከተለያየ አካል ነው መረጃዎችን የሚያገኙት እና እነሱን ኢንፍሉዌንስ የሚያደርጓቸውን ኢንፍሉዌንስ በማድረግ ነው አልቲሜትሊ ኢንዳይሬክትሊ የኛን ናሬቲቭ በተሻለ ተቀባይነት እንዲኖረው ማድረግ የሚቻለው እና ኦል ዲስ አር ፓርት ኦፍ ዲስከሽንስ። እንዴት ነው መሄድ ያለብን? ማን ጋር እናስቀድም? ምን የትኛው አክተር ሞር ኢምፖርታንት ነው? ካለን ጊዜ አንጻር ማንኛውን ፕራዮሪታይዝ ማድረግ አለብን? ዶሳር ዴሊብሬሽንስ እና በዚህ አግባብ ይሄ ከስቴት ዲፓርትመንት ጋር የምናደርገው ፕሮሰስ አንዱ ነው እና እንዳልኩት ኢትስ ኖት ሪኮሜንዴሽን ኢትስ ኖት ስቴት የአሜሪካ መንግስት ያወጣው በኢትዮጵያ ላይ ፖሊሲ አይደለም። ኢትስ ሪኮሜንዴሽን እና ኢትስ አን ኢምፖርታንት ቶፒክ ዊ ሹድ ዲስከስ ኢት ግን አልሶ ዊ ሹድ ኖት ቢ ኦቨርሶልድ አዝ ላይክ ቱ ኮንስኮንሻል እና በጣም ዳይሬክትሊ ልክ በሆነ አግሪመንት ተደርጎ የሚተገበር ወይም ደግሞ የአሜሪካ መንግስት በቀጥታ ወስዶ የሚተገብረው ተደርጎ መታየት የለበትም። ዊ ውድ ቢ ሃፒ ለምሳሌ ሳንክሽኖችን ኢምፕሊመንት ቢያደርጓቸው ውድ ቢ ሃፒ ፎር ደም ቱ ሳንክሽን ሃቢ ግን ሪያሊቲውን እና የእኛን ውሽ ለረቤት መለያየት መቻል አለብን እና ኢንዲስ ኬዝ የአድቮኬሲ ፕሮሰሱ አውትካም ቢሆንም ኢትስ ጀስት ሪኮሜንዴሽን እና ሰዎች የተወሰነ የተሳሳተ እይታ እንዳይኖራቸው ስለፈራው ነው ይህንን የማነሳው። ብሮደር ኢምፕሊኬሽኑ ግን ምንድን ነው? አይ ቲንክ ዊ ኒድ ቱ ስቴፕ አፕ አወር አድቮኬሲ ዊ ኒድ ቱ ኢንጌጅ ሞር ፒፕል ኤንድ ዊ ኒድ ሞር ኦርጋናይዜሽንስ። አንዱ ላንድስኬፑን የአድቮኬሲ ላንድስኬፑን ኢንፍሉዌንስ ማድረግ የምንችለው ከተለያየ ፕሬሲንግ ፖይንት ተመሳሳይ ሜሴጂንጎችን ማስተላለፍ ስንችል ነው። and that can only happen when we have more organizations that exclusively focus on advocacy. I mean የአማራ ኦርጋናይዜሽኖች አሉ፣ አብዛኞቹ ኮሚኒቲ ኦርጋናይዜሽንስ ናቸው። ሞር ፎከስ የሚያደርጉት ሎካል የሆነው ኮሚኒቲ ኦር ሎካል የሆነው ኤሌክትድ ኦፊሻሎችን እነሱ ጋር ሚቲንጎች በማደራጀት ነው። And I don't think we have that many advocacy organizations. Look at other communities, including within Ethiopian communities. I just want to make it clear that AAA would be happy to see another Amhara advocacy organization that's legitimately representing Amharas, not those who are trying to confuse the messaging. Obviously, ምክንያቱም በአማራ ስም ድርጅት መመስረት ማለት ስለ አማራ አድቮኬት ማድረግ እንዳልሆነ እናውቃለን እና I think everyone should be encouraged እንደዛ ድርጅቶችን መስርቶ በተለያየ መንገድ ፑሽ ማድረግ እና በእንዲህ አይነት ፕላትፎርሞችም ላይ wish it was not just AAA ሌሎች ድርጅቶች ቢኖሩ it could have been helpful. ግን እንደዚህ አይነት ከዛ ሳይድ የሚመጡ ኢንቪቴሽኖች they are based on the engagement organizations have with them. It's not like you get invited, you don't demand. Of course, through process engage በማድረግ ፕላትፎርም ውስጥ እንድትገኝ ታደርጋለህ እና ያንን ለማድረግ I think we need to encourage folks who are interested in advocacy and understand the process. You don't have to work with AAA. I think as long as there's messaging synchronization, it's fine to also work as a separate organization because that itself has its own relevance. እና ያንን በደንብ ብናየው ጥሩ ነው። Complicated የሆነ ፕሮሰስ ስለሆነ we have to know where to press and which outcome we are targeting. Complicated በሆነ ፕሮሰስ ስለምናልፍ it's gonna take time and ultimately it's contingent on the situation on the ground. That's always important እና ያ ሲባል ግን ደግሞ አሁን ቅድምም ሲባል የነበረው ይሄ ፕሮሰስ አዲስ ፕሮሰስ እንደሆነም መጀመር የለበትም። this is a process that fairly standard ከዚህ በፊት ቲፒኤልኤፍም ስልጣን ላይ ያለ እንደዚህ አይነት ሲሚላር ኔጎሽዬሽኖች ነበሩ አመንግ ኢትዮጵያና ዲያስፖራ ኮሚኒቲስ። ከዛም በኋላ ሙከራዎች ነበሩ በተመሳሳይ ስብስቦች እነዚህን ድርጅቶች በአንድም ሆነ በሌላ መንገድ ኢንክሉዲንግ ሰብአዊ መብት ተሟጋች ድርጅቶች በሚያሰባቸው ስብስቦች የምናውቃቸው ናቸው። and that's why we know their position is very hostile towards us. Now, given all these things, I think having another organization. Sorry, Robert, maybe you can go ahead, and I think I'm fishing.
Okay, as you can see, our director of advocacy, Hona, also is doing this in addition to being a PhD student and a father. So we really appreciate his time, especially in this space, which has taken about 3 hours. I realized that there are several people who raised their hands to speak, but didn't get a chance. And I apologize that we weren't able to allow everyone an opportunity to speak. We've done our best to answer as many questions as possible. For those of you who didn't get an opportunity, I invite you to please feel free to message me directly. And if there's anything that I can clarify, I can do my best. With that being said, I have tried to address some of the audience's questions in DM already. So I think I'm also noticing some repeated questions. So I really urge you, if you weren't able to stay for the entire discussion, to please listen to the recording of this space because you can essentially get a sense of what was said, and that's the benefit of having the recording. And I think there was a few foundational questions that were also addressed, and I think that's what makes opportunities like this very useful because I think sometimes people, might not know the history behind AAA, the track record of advocacy, and the kind of work it's been doing, including with different stakeholders, including State Department, various congressional offices. And I think this sometimes gives us an opportunity just to kind of go over and contextualize what's been done, what was done, what's being done, and then future trajectories. Because in parallel to the Amhara resistance on the ground, the advocacy in the diaspora, I think, has managed to have a large impact, a significant impact, and every action that's done it should be noted that it's always done for, the interests of the Amhara people at heart. That's the reason for AAA's inception in the first place. And so, if there are questions regarding this particular meeting, I noticed, for example, some people asked about some of the other diaspora organizations that were participatory in this meeting. And so, regarding that question, I urge you to see the first pinned post above in this space, which was the original post that preceded this space's discussion. And in that post, it quotes a post from the State Department Bureau of African Affairs, and that in turn quote another post by the organizers of this event, or one of the organizers. And I think that also outlines some of the details, including some of the participants. And so I urge everyone just to see that. I hope major questions were addressed. I think Ted also can't hear me. So Ted, if you have something to say, maybe Hona, if you can relay the message to Ted.
Yeah, Ted, we're just wrapping up. Maybe you can close it up if you have anything else to say. But sorry for the interruption earlier. But I think I was just making a point that this is not a new process. It's a fairly standard process, and has happened in the past, and will likely be requested again, whether we should engage with that or not. I think that there were some suggestions in that regard, and I think those are valid suggestions. So that's something we will continue to evaluate. As I said earlier, we prefer to avoid unless we are in a situation we can't. But this is we thought, for those who don't have the context and would like to understand the proper meaning of the output, we thought this space would provide an opportunity to explain that. There are a number of things we could discuss, and I think folks will be able to, you will join us for the discussion on AAA advocacy. We will be hosting in a couple of days, and there perhaps we can go into details, but we understand, those are decisions that always have drawbacks, because there are always trade-offs. Trade-offs are, always intended to be unpleasant, some of the things we see there. So we understand the sentiment, and I think it's something we'll continue to engage and listen more. But ultimately, the motivation is and the intents are outlined here. It's ultimately, actions speak louder than words. We will continue to do what we're supposed to do, and we do this because, as we always say, because we have to do it. It's a must to do, and I think we don't expect necessarily, everyone would be on the same page on everything. We're a large community. We do have different views, and we do have different information, and we make decisions based on all that. So let's normalize, different subjective decisions. Obviously, we're not undermining the importance of the AAA's work and this one, but also it's perfectly fine to also recognize that sometimes we have different views on things and what's the best approach. We're not differing on strategic objectives. We're not differing on what's happening, but in terms of operational tactics in AAA advocacy, folks might have different assessment, and they might say this would have been better, and that's fine. We appreciate the feedback and the input, and we will continue to engage with our community to hear as widely as possible and make an informed decision. That's the purpose of this tutorial space, and I hope people have got some background information that helps to understand the process, context, and output. Maybe with that, Ted, I invite Ted to close.
Thank you, Juane. Appreciate it. And everyone, thank you for joining us today. Short notice, but it's great to see such a large number of people joining and also being engaged. We do get engagements on a regular basis through directly through our email info@amharaamerica.org, through our website, Facebook and Twitter. And there's a lot of recommendations, lots of information that's helpful, suggestions. So all of these are, and also people, wanting to volunteer for various aspects. So, we do appreciate that. We do appreciate you, coming here and being engaged and expressing your concerns. We hope some, the context that we provided, brings, answer some of the questions that all of you legitimately had and concerns as well. I think, there was a misunderstanding that this was some kind of a formal political agreement, which it is not. This is, the State Department, even members of Congress on a regular basis, ask us, okay, what should we do? What should be included, like in the legislation? What should be included in, what should we say to the State Department? Help us draft a letter. Help us draft a tweet. Help us draft a statement. These are things that we do on a regular basis, and these are some, questions or requests that come to us. From policymakers on a regular basis, and we try to respond to these, in ensuring that we're representing, our community, our interests in the best way possible. This is not in any way trying to, give legitimacy to, any of these groups from AAA at all. These are not groups that we engage with on a regular basis. We know who they are. We read the statements. Sometimes we are responding to some of the misinformation and disinformation they put out there. This is just a one-time ask that was presented by the State Department in terms of like if they can get a consensus on policy recommendations that they can push for. The initial points that this group had put together, we saw as being very problematic. These were also points that we were asked about by Foreign Affairs Committee members. We were very frank and honest in terms of the process. I'm talking about the original one. And then when we were re-engaged, we thought, okay, does it benefit our people if we were to re-engage and put in their recommendations that we think might be helpful, that may alleviate the suffering of our people? It was not easy. It was, it's not an in-person meeting, but it was a back and forth via different communication channels. Finally we thought, okay, at the end of the day, this is not what we would ultimately want, but we think the release of, if the State Department pushes for release of political prisoners, majority of those political prisoners that would be released are Amharas. If they push for the release of journalists, which are essentially political prisoners, majority of the people, it would be Amharas that would be the biggest benefactors of this. Also, just all political, prisoners of conscience, and civilians, that would be the biggest benefactors would be Amharas, given the thousands of Amharas that have been rounded up, and including the Fanos that have been, unfortunately, imprisoned. The lifting of the telecommunication blackout, we felt that our people would benefit. The sanctioning, we were the ones that pushed for the sanction. Believe me, there were, people within the State Department that didn't want that, and so we pushed for that, and we got that. So, are there things here that our people would benefit from? Yes, it's just something that ideal we would want. Are these the points that we would put together? And push for? No. We will continue to push for those points, in our direct communication with all of the policymakers. And the biggest thing that we're pushing for is right now is for the Abiy security forces to leave the Amhara region, for sanctions of Abiy regime forces, and himself, and for the United States not to support loans from the IMF and the World Bank. This is something that we discussed with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee members, to block that as much as possible. and also for justice and accountability. It's a long road. It's a long process. There are many capable Amhara organizations here, in the U.S. and across the globe that are capable of doing advocacy, and we, invite all of you to do advocacy. As I said earlier before, we have many meetings with members of Congress, and we always include the local Amhara organizations because they are constituents in those conversations, in those meetings, because we want them to be actively engaged in doing advocacy. And when we say advocacy, it's not just with policymakers, but includes with human rights organizations. It includes with journalists. It includes with think tanks. It includes with academic institutions, and any kind of center of learning. So please continue to do that. It is critically important. The recognition of the genocide against the Amhara people can only come if we all are collectively pushing for it and taking measurable actions, to make, and if we do that, we can make it a reality. With that said, again, as always, as an organization, we take all your inputs, comments, seriously, because that's how, as an organization, we continue to improve and get better at what we do. Thank you.
And so with that, we're going to close out the space. Thank you, everybody, for attending this session. We're going to do our best to host similar sessions like this one going forward. And for those who weren't able to stay for the entire session, the recording will be available using the same link you used to attend this space.